was almost a triple-double.
Oh, was? Man, the one time I missed the game is when he decides that I'm going to start watching all the games again. That's just going to help me out.
Got about 1 minute to go.
Okay, thanks, Kyle.
Shouldn't you have like a T-minus 60 or something counting?
I should have
Not gonna
said.
go like 5, 4.
What's those boards called when they do the?
Oh man, what are those called?
No, yeah, we
Got a really specific name.
Really? What was it? Clapboard.
I feel like there was another name that I learned at one point, like a really archaic name.
We should get one of those.
I should know this. I have a degree in, that is like the only thing that my undergraduate degree is there for.
Aren't we missing a few planning commissioners?
Let's see.
Counting 1, 2.
As long as we've got quorum.
It's
Kyle, are we live?
We are not, Kurt? We're ready when you are.
Fantastic.
Give us one moment, Mr. Chair, while we do a
7.
quorum check.
Very good.
I'm having difficulty keeping up while also letting people in. 1, 2.
Seven. So we have quorum.
I'm counting 7.
Shall we start?
Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Very good. Thanks very much. All right. With that, then, I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 24th, 2020 meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission. I'm David Carter, Chair of the Commission, and I'd like to turn it over to Kyle Kobe for rules of engagement for this remote meeting.
Thank you very much. My name is Kyle Kobe, and I'll be facilitating the Zoom video portion of this meeting. With me here is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. We will work alongside the chair, who's on remote video, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Currently, I have everyone muted so we can talk through the general ground rules for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon located next to the microphone icon. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on for the duration. If you are participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Somewhere on your Zoom screen, you will also see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. All attachments, reference materials, and submissions from the public are included in the agenda packet. A few reminders to ensure the provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act are met. Commissioners, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Members of city staff must also state their name and title each time they speak. I would also ask that applicants and members of the public identify themselves each time before they speak to ensure that everyone is able to follow along. Individuals who signed up in advance to provide public comments remotely will be called upon by name. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct you to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each commissioner individually to provide their vote. Staff will then announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. I want to again remind everyone to please mute yourself when you are not speaking, and I'll now turn the meeting back over to the chair.
Thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. Let's start by acknowledging receipt of the minutes for the July 20th and 22nd meetings. Assuming everyone has had a chance to read those, do I have a motion to approve, or do I have any suggestions for edits? Commissioner Starkov.
I move to approve the minutes from June and July.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckoff. David Carter, Chair. Do I have a second? Commissioner Ashworth, by hand motion. Jeff, may I ask you to read the roll, please?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Certainly. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
I don't think that he is in. Oh, he's joining right now.
Yep. Okay, keep going on that one. Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Do we have any reports from any committees that have met over the past month? Okay. Then, Jeff, do we have any written communications from the public that are not already in the packet?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. All communications are part of your packet this evening that are available.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Do we have any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. We do not.
Thank you, David Carter, Chair. Do we have any written actions of any waiver requests or determinations made by the city engineer?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. We do not.
Okay, thank you. David Carter, Chair. Do we have any disclosure of ex parte communications by commissioners? Seeing none. Do we have any declarations of abstentions for specific agenda items by commissioners? Also seeing none, I would like to just mention, unless there are any objections, I would like to defer item F, the appointment to the Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board until the Wednesday meeting. Any objections on that note? Okay, with that, we move on to the portion of the meeting for general public comment. The general public is invited to make a brief statement up to 3 minutes of any items not already on the agenda. We do have one letter from KT Walsh of the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association, which I'd like to acknowledge. And Kyle, is there anyone in the chamber there who has appeared for public comment?
Kyle Kobe with Planning, there is not.
Okay, thank you, David Carter, Chair. We don't have anyone else signed up to speak, so with that, I'll move on to our regular agenda. Items 1 and 2 both concern the Stratford Water Tower Tank Addition at 1225 Sunset Drive. Both of these items, if I'm not mistaken, can be taken together. Is that correct, Jeff?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. That's correct. That we'd need two separate motions, but they can be discussed at the same time if you so choose.
Fantastic. Thank you, David Carter, Chair. So we've got the preliminary plat and also the special use permit. And it looks like Sandy will be presenting. Is that correct?
Thank you. Good evening, Sandy Day, Planning Office. The two items for consideration related to the water tank replacement application are a preliminary plat and a special use permit. Park is located on the northwest corner of Sunset Drive and Stratford Road. The existing water tower is located in the northwest quadrant of the park. Park includes water tower, playground, equipment quadrant, a play field in the southeast quadrant, and an open field in the northwest quadrant. The new water tower is proposed to be located in the northeast quadrant of the park, with an existing tower being demolished and that area returned to usable green space. City code requires building permits be issued on platted property. Park was not previously platted and therefore must be subdivided in accordance with the subdivision regulations for the City of Lawrence as part of the development process. Additionally, the existing streets were never dedicated through a subdivision process, and the legal description of the park includes a street segment along the south property line, Stratford Road. It's therefore included in the preliminary plat. Streets in these areas are built to city standards, but the right-of-way does not exist. A part of the subdivision plat process for the street segment of Stratford Road will be formally dedicated as public right-of-way. Current subdivision regulations require 60 feet of right-of-way or 30 feet from the center line for both sides of the street as a local street. Streets in this area were built in a narrower space than the current design standard, making it necessary to apply an alternative design standard through the subdivision process for this application. Segment of Stratford Road is constructed within 50 feet wide area that will be dedicated as that public right-of-way. The variance will not affect the street function, width, construction design, or operation, and it will not affect the boundaries of what is as the park green space within that property. The variance is technical requirement to meet the subdivision regulations. There are no planned street widenings in this area. And Stratford Road has a uniform width along that corridor east of Iowa Street. Park will not be subdivided but retain its current dimensions with the proper dedications per city code. Special use permit is applicable to major utility and service uses. The use is defined in the Land Development Code as those that have substantial impact. Such uses may be permitted in when the public interest supersedes the usual limitations placed on land use and transcends the usual restraints of a district for reasons of necessary location and community-wide interest. Typical uses include water and wastewater treatment facilities, major storage facilities, airports, and power generation plants. The application meets this definition. Tank serves as a wide area of the community, and the tank is part of critical infrastructure for water distribution and fire protection. The existing water tank will remain operational while the tower is constructed, then demolished in the last stages of the project, and that area would be returned to green space that would be available for future park programming. The water tank serves as secondary purpose of being a support structure for telecommunications equipment. The county maintains equipment vital to fire and medical communication systems, emergency management systems, and township fire and medical communications. This equipment must be fully maintained and operational during the construction phase and will be relocated to the new tower upon completion of that construction. Private communication carriers, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon, have been notified of the project, and some of the representatives have met with staff regarding the project, but there are no commitments from any of those carriers at this time. The water tank structure is designed to support communication equipment below the bowl of the tank on the column. Ports at the base of the structure would allow cables to be placed interior to the structure and will not be strung up along the exterior as they are on the existing tank. Planning for the communication carriers for future co-location have been worked into the project with pad sites identified located to the west of the proposed new tank in a uniform planned area. Only county equipment is shown with a building and an ornamental security fencing around that building. State and federal mandates for redundant security require both a secure building and fencing to prevent tampering with that equipment. The water tower will not be fenced. While references to the existing tank on West 6th Street have been made, directing people to an example of the structure that's proposed for the site, there is no need for fencing and none is proposed other than the temporary construction fencing shown on the site plan. This allows the tower to occupy a much smaller footprint and restore more green space to active use than the current structure allows. Municipal Services and Operations staff is here this evening to provide a presentation on the structure type and specifics of the project and the location within the park. Location of the new tower disturbs the least amount of active use within the park and meets design standards that were specified by the city's consultant for operation and construction criteria. Project includes a new paved pedestrian pathway through the park that follows the established footpath that's been trod by users of the park over time. This element was added to the project at the behest of the Parks Department. Public sidewalks along the public streets of the project will also be added and improved as needed. The north side pedestrian pathway will be replaced and widened and provide access for the communication buildings that are also part of the project. This includes a new driveway to Sunset Drive rather than vehicles jumping the curbs for access. A second separate driveway is also proposed along Sunset Drive that provides access to an overhead door at the base of the structure, and this allows vehicular access that also does not jump the curb and provides a city-appropriate driveway for access to the structure. The base of the building includes an oversized garage door that allows city staff access to the building as needed, and the base can be used for the storage of necessary equipment and testing that would be used for the tower. Finally, during the review, several residents indicated that the Oregon Trail went through this area. Information obtained from Watkins Museum supports that the trail did go through the neighborhood, but the exact pathway is not identifiable. There's no remaining land features that demonstrate the actual location. Water Tower Park is not located within a historic district or the environs of a designated property or district, and it's not subject to review by this as a historic asset. Commissioners' actions tonight consider the preliminary plat and the related street right-of-way reduction variance and also the special use permit. The preliminary plat, variance, and special use permits are separate action items. Special use permit is an advisory item that the recommendation will be forwarded to the City Commission. The preliminary plat action concludes with the Planning Commission, though the applicant will need to submit the final plat for review and approval, and the final plat will also be forwarded and considered by the City Commission at a future agenda meeting upon completion of the preliminary plat. I'm happy to answer any questions, and as I mentioned, city staff is the applicant in this, and they are on the line as well to provide a presentation for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sandy. David Carter, Chair. I see 4 representatives of the city, 3 from Municipal Services and Operations, 1 from Parks and Rec, as well as 1 representative from Black and Veatch. So applicants have, well, our rules are, bylaws are 10 minutes per item. That would be a maximum of 20 minutes for presentation. Would anyone like to speak about this proposal?
Yes.
Representing the applicant.
Yes, Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. The consultant and I would like to speak on behalf of the project. And at this point, I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners and City of Lawrence residents. Like I stated before, I'm Leah Morris, the Treatment Division Manager for the MSO Department and the Project Manager for the Stratford Water Tower Replacement Project. Sandra Day has been assisting us in this project as well as a planner too. And then Andrew Hansen is representing Black & Veatch as the consultant on the project. So I've gone over the introductions. This presentation will go over the overview, and then we'll have questions from the commission as well as comments from the public. The existing tower is a 500,000 gallon tank, and it was constructed in 1954. It's an original multi-leg tower, and it's 132 feet in height. The interior is coated in epoxy, while the exterior has an enamel coating, but it should be noted that the original coatings of both the interior and the exterior were lead-based, and the new coatings or the current coatings have encapsulated them. This tower serves our West Hills pressure zone, which is the city's high pressure zone. And it also serves, like Sandy stated, as a housing structure for 3 cellular providers, as well as Douglas County emergency services. I'm going to now turn it over to Andrew Hansen, representing Black & Veatch.
Andrew Hansen of Black & Veatch. First, to provide a bit of the operational considerations to give you an appreciation of the importance for Stratford Tank. As Leah mentioned, the West Hills service level serves the western half of Lawrence, basically west of the university, where the high ground is located. There's 3 existing elevated tanks within this service level, and they each kind of serve their respective areas. So if you split the distribution system up, basically there's 3 separate parts, and each tank, while they function together, is important in each of their respective areas to make sure that there's sufficient water during fire flows or during peak irrigation season, etc. Next slide, please. A little bit more specific detail in that regard. What's shown here on the left is a diurnal demand curve. So starting at 00, which is midnight, demands are well below average. As you move on through the morning to around 6 a.m. and people start taking showers, watering their lawns, demands rise quickly and they go above average. It's at that point that the water tower starts releasing water into the distribution system to serve those needs. In addition, if there's a fire or main break, it serves those needs as well. On the right is a model results from a hydraulic model that Black & Veatch performed on the system that shows the 3 tanks in the West Hills service level functioning together. The one thing to point out is that the Stratford tank fluctuates more than the others, which would lend credence to it being probably the most important tank in the West Hills service level. Next slide, please. So back in 2014, Black & Veatch performed a field investigation and structural evaluations of the tank. We determined that there's a lot of structural repairs that are needed. The coating has obviously failed, as shown here on the picture, down to bare metal, and we see a lot of pitting and major corrosion of the steel. Other upgrades that we recognized were that it's no longer OSHA compliant. It was built over 50 years ago, and so the ladder that's used to climb the tower is no longer compliant, as well as the safety climbing system, so those need replaced. A major concern is containing those lead-based coatings. If you are to remove them, you would have to tent the entire structure and try and contain those, which would be both costly and difficult. So in our evaluations, we did a net present value comparison, which compared performing the repairs and the recoating of the existing tank against the cost to simply replace it with a new tank. We found that those are very similar in cost. One thing I would like to point out, though, is that those analysis were done in 2014. We do know that there's been additional significant degradation of the tank that has occurred since that time. And so we feel that the cost to repair the existing tank likely has went up, but a full structural reanalysis would need to be performed to confirm that. The last thing that we felt was a replacement driver is that we know the existing tank has a finite service life. So even if we do remove the coatings at this point, fix it structurally, apply new coatings, it's probably only going to last one more cycle, one more paint cycle. So we felt now is as good a time as any to replace it. Next slide, please. So relative to the replacements, there's basically 4 different options. The top left is what's called a multi-column tank. The one shown here is obviously is the Stratford tank. The top right is called a hydrosphere, or otherwise referred to as a spheroid. It's also an all-metal tank, looks kind of like a lollipop. The bottom left is a composite tank. This is what the city implemented at Stone Ridge about 10 years ago. That is a concrete column which supports a steel bowl. The bottom right is a hydropillar, very similar in shape to the composite, but it is an all-metal tank. The relative to capital cost, the top 2 being the multi-column and the hydrosphere, are cheapest to construct from a capital standpoint because they have the least amount of materials in them. But when you do a net present value analysis, typically the composite tanks win out because there's substantially less coatings that are required during the recoating process every approximately 20 years. In addition to that, relative to the composite tank, it provides interior space. In this application, the city is going to install new water quality monitoring equipment, and that equipment would be housed within the base of the tank, as opposed to the top 2 options, which don't have sufficient space for that. So you would need a separate additional structure, which also is not part of that cost analysis performed on the existing tank. Some operational, relative to security, the existing tank is fenced, as mentioned previously, and that is to keep people from vandalizing it, but it's also a safety concern with people potentially trying to climb the legs of the tower and falling. The composite won't allow that to happen. So by removing the security fencing around the tank, we substantially increase the green space within the park. The last item to point out relative to the project is the multi-leg tank. There's only one manufacturer in the US that currently complies with our specification. And so if we were to go that approach, we would not have a competitive bidding environment, which is a risk to the city relative to cost. Next slide. So our recommendation is, as Sandy had mentioned, is to go with the composite style tank. And we feel it's the best option for the city because of the low maintenance. In addition to evaluating the tank styles, we also looked at a couple different tank sizes, and we felt that a 750,000 gallon tank worked better relative to hydraulic modeling that we performed, the operational flexibility it provided the city, and it's the efficiency of scale relative to cost is not substantial, so we felt it was better for the city. The height of the new tank would be similar to the existing tank at 132,000 feet, or I'm sorry, 132 feet. The pedestal would only be 32-foot diameter with a 70-foot bowl. It's important relative to Douglas County EMS that they have a secure structure, and extremely important for the city relative to 911. And so their antennas will be mounted on the very top of the tank. If cellular providers were to be added, they would be added at the top of the column, which is where the tank transitions from gray to white. We would have ports in the concrete there where they could mount their antennas. With that, I'll turn it back over to Leah.
Thank you, Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. One of the really important things to understand about this project is that a new tower can't be built in the same location without a significant cost to the city as well as Douglas County Emergency Services. In order to maintain fire protection as well as serviceability to the residents, the new tower must be in service before the old tower can be demolished. This is necessary for water distribution operations as well as emergency management and fire protection. So our county and city emergency and non-emergency communications radio network, as well as the main 911 services network, is hosted by the existing tower. That means that all the tornado sirens and all other weather alerts, Amber alerts, 911 calls, and all of the emergency radio communications from our first responders, like the police department, fire, and ambulances, is hosted through that tower. If the city were to construct a new tower in the same location as the old tower, then a temporary water tank would be required in order to maintain fire protection and serviceability. This temporary distribution system would include a 500,000 gallon temporary water tank and a pump station in order to maintain the required pressure for this system. And this would add a significant cost to the project, which is not part of the current project budget. So, and that kind of breaks down into the temporary tank rental, which we've estimated to be in the realm of $325,000 for the construction, as well as temporary pumping costs over the course of construction, which would amount to about $630,000. Therefore, that increased cost to construct in the same location just for the water side would be about $1 million added to the project budget. And it would also add costs for Douglas County Emergency Management. If they were directed to house their communication equipment, either temporarily or permanently somewhere else, then we're looking at a second tower on the site, and again, adding costs to them as well. So that's why we looked at new possible sites within the park area. The Northeast quadrant was selected based off of a number of different staff meetings and determined in order to prepare enough documentation to submit and move forward with the preliminary plat, as well as the other milestones that we need to meet. So looking at the Southwest quadrant, we considered the existing park equipment and all of the trees along there, and didn't feel that the residents and that the city would be in favor of that quadrant. And then looking towards the southeast side where the current practice field is, and the geotechnical report, because the borings show rock in that area, that kind of left the northeast quadrant for analysis. So again, you know, the considerations were the park equipment, the existing trees, new access to the tower, as well as to the emergency management facility building, the geotechnical analysis, as well as looking at the existing utilities in order to serve the building and the tower, including the water lines, fiber, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, and electricity. And that way we could understand which site was best to service the new tower. I'll now turn it back over to Andrew Hansen.
Thanks, Leah. Andrew Hansen with Black and Beach. Some other improvements that are going to be part of the project. The first is new sidewalks. Sandy had mentioned the Parks Department desire to add the winding sidewalk along that currently is a path diagonally across the site. In addition, along the western edge of the property, the existing sidewalk has been heaved in many locations by tree roots, creating stumbling hazards. We'll be replacing all of that. There's a lot of water line along the north side and west side of the park that are either aging cast iron or transite pipe. And rather than creating a construction zone again in a few years, we felt that it was most prudent to replace those lines at this time. As we mentioned, there's going to be increased green space by demolition of the existing tower and turning it back into green space. And lastly, since we are going to have water quality monitoring equipment in the tower, those will have drains, and those drains need to go to sanitary sewer. So we'll be extending the sanitary sewer to the northwest from the tank, as well as improving the sewer line between a couple properties to the north. Next slide, please. The city requested that B&V do a shadow model, shadow simulation for use in these public meetings. I'll mention that this shadow simulation has been updated since we made the presentation at the public meeting. This is the shadow simulation itself is a 3D CAD rendering, and it's generated between 8 and 5 p.m. During the spring and fall solstice. We felt those were the most important areas to get. A lot of outdoor use going on. It's got a longer shadow, not as long as a winter shadow, but it provided a good average representation of what the shadows would look like. There was a comment at the public meeting about whether the shadow represented a 500,000 gallon tank or a 750,000 gallon tank. And we've confirmed that both of these shadows represent a 750,000 gallon tank. So you can see that the biggest change is just a shift of the shadow to where properties along Hilltop get a little less shadow and properties along Sunset get a little more shadow. We obviously didn't include trees in this simulation, but if you look at an aerial, a vast majority of this area has tree canopy that covers a substantial area of these shadows. The other area that as consultants that we looked at and we were not able to identify was any solar panels by being used by any of those residences that we would impact, and we could not identify any. Next slide, please. Relative to the project schedule, before COVID, and we're sliding here a little bit with the public meeting sliding back a month, our intentions were to advertise this project in October and receive bids in November. So we'll be, given our slight delay, we'll be pressing to get this project bid by the end of the year. But our hope is that we have a contract in place by January of 2021, such that the contractor can begin procuring materials and begin construction as soon as the ground thaws in 2021, and have a majority of 2021 to structurally build the concrete and steel part of the tank. Then they would come back when conditions are favorable for painting in the spring of 2022 and complete the project in April, May of 2022, followed by demolition of the existing tank in June of 2022. With that, that concludes our presentation, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you very much, David Carter, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Morris and Mr. Hanson. We'll move on to the. I'm sure there will be questions for you from the commission. We're going to move on to the public comment now. We have 17 people who are signed up to speak, and I'm going to call on them in order, beginning with Ann Fowler. Is Ann Fowler present? And if you just unmute, thank you. And thank you, and forgive me. And each speaker, I'm going to ask you to please to keep to the 3-minute limit.
I will definitely keep to the 3-minute limit. I'm Ann Fowler. You have, the Planning Commission has received multiple letters that I think very articulately explain our concerns with this project as it is currently set. I would encourage you to take all of those comments very seriously. And today, when I reread all of the letters that you have, I noticed a new one dated today from Steve Scannell. I was particularly impressed with that one because he definitely and thoroughly describes the options. So I would encourage the planning commissioners to pay particular attention to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler. Next, we have Haskell Springer.
This is Haskell Springer, living on Sunset Drive. I have read all the letters submitted by my neighbors and acquaintances. I've read the Planning Commission. I've rather read the reports from the engineers and the planners from the city. I read even Scannell's recent letter, that is today's letter. And I see that almost universally, the community around the park is opposed to the current plan. There are alternatives, and Scannell's letter lays those out rather well. He takes into account increased cost and other matters, but you can read that for yourself. I won't repeat them. I'm just here to say that so far as I know, all the neighbors and acquaintances I have spoken to in this wider area are opposed to the current project. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Springer. Next speaker is Caroline Grotz. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. Ms. Grotz here?
Yes, I am. It's Caroline Grotz. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I really am echoing exactly what Ann Fowler and Haskell Springer have said. I have read the most of the letters that you received in your packet, and I would say 95% of those comments are all in opposition to this plan. And my husband and I, we live at 1101 Sunset, part of the Hillcrest neighborhood. We would urge you to deny this special, this application by the city for this special use permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grotz. David Carter, Chair. Next speaker is Paula Martin. If you could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Mr. Carter. My name is Paula Martin. My husband, Kurt Falkenstein, and I have lived on Stratford Road for 34 years. And we spent many pleasant hours at the Water Tower Park with our daughter when she was growing up. And I recently was reading the Lawrence Business Magazine 2020, and it's kind of changed what my comments are tonight. I agree with everything everybody has said as far as this opposition. But I was struck by an article in that magazine on the Hobbs Park, and K.T. Walsh was lamenting that Hobbs is a small park, and that out in the newer areas, they're a lot bigger because of the open land. By comparison to Hobbs Park, Water Tower Park is, Hobbs Park is enormous by comparison and has so many amenities. And even though our park, Water Tower Park, is only minimally equipped, it has a slide, it has a few swings, it has a backstop, it is our only neighborhood park. The kids in West Hills can walk to this park from any home in the neighborhood, and there's not a day that you won't see kids playing there. You'll see soccer practices, kickball games, parents throwing baseballs to their kids who are just learning to play, families having picnics. Hillcrest and West Hills host annual picnics there. And I'm going back to KT Walsh for a minute because this is her quote. Our kids, meaning the kids in East Lawrence, deserve a bigger park. All we are asking in West Hills is to leave the little park we have as it is. I don't understand the comments about increased green space. I'm not an engineer, but it appears to me that the footprint is considerably larger than the existing footprint. And I talked to an engineer in the neighborhood about that confirmed that for me. So perhaps I'm misreading the size of that footprint, but I do not understand how we would have increased green space. I know from what you've said that it would be more expensive to put in the temporary tank and to keep it where it is. It seems the lead paint issue can be dealt with just as it was a number of years ago. But I'm just urging this commission to keep our park. It's the only one we have, the only one that's safe for our kids that they can walk to. And even if there's an increased cost, I think the health of our neighborhood should also be considered. It's not just a financial cost, it's also a livability cost. And I would like you to consider that as well. I'm also on the board of the West Hills Homes Association, and I respectfully request the board to consider that was sent to you by our board opposing this project. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on this important issue.
Thank you, Judge Martin. David Carter, Chair. Next speaker is Ray Zegebrecht.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I come from the perspective of having a grandfather who helped found the community of Florence with his farm on the west side, and then built a home right across the street from where this new enormous behemoth of a water tower is being proposed to be constructed. He raised his daughter there, and then I watched her son, my brother, raise his children there and go across the street and play right where you proposed building this park. As a physician, I can tell you that if the coronavirus has taught us anything, it's the value of green space and safe space where communities can come together at a safe distance, where kids can play safely and parents can be present as well. And by encroaching on this space, it precludes the community from being able to participate in that very valuable interaction that really doesn't have a price point. We're in the middle of an economic contraction, and you're proposing spending more money right now to build something that supposedly will save money in the future, but that's really to be determined. You don't know necessarily how much wear and tear these new water towers will create. And so I think that it's unwise to spend more money now when we're having a contraction economically in our community. You speak about community-wide interests, and ultimately, this is supposed to represent the community. And what you have here is a community of people coming to you and saying, this doesn't represent our interests at all. We are the community, we live there. And so I think that what we have is special interests. We have the special interests of Black and Beach. We have the special interests of the construction companies. And I'd like to know what special interests maybe Ms. Morris and Ms. Day have with these organizations. You know, this is a more expensive project up front, and maybe these organizations will benefit financially and these individuals will benefit financially. And finally, I'd like to say that, you know, family and a sunny area, you look at this current existing water tower and so much light can come to that area. You know, this shadow doesn't even begin to, the shadow diagram doesn't even begin to show the cost that it will have on the sunshine and enjoyment of the area. And so you're going to take away public space and health benefit from that, and you're going to add health risk because the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Humans, shows that these towers are potentially carcinogenic to humans. You're going to put it closer to where people live. So ultimately, you're doing something against the public good. You're hurting the interest of the public, and you're not listening to the public and the community. And that's what you were supposed to do. That's what your job is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zegebrecht. Next speaker is Lynn Zegebrecht. Is Lynn Zegebrecht on the call?
Kyle Kobe with planning. I am looking for that name.
I do not see that name specifically.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. Let's move on
She's
to.
there. She just is having trouble muting her.
Oh, it was S.
Oh,
okay.
Forgive me.
That's why.
David Carter, Chair. Ms. Zagerbrecht, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize. My laptop died on me. My husband's is the one in front of me, and it didn't let me come on either and unmute myself. So sorry for my delay. That was my son you just heard. He is far more intelligent than I, and he is far more informed about health benefits of this beautiful park. This is the same house that I am speaking about, but from the perspective of the daughter of the gentleman who built it and his wife. And I'd like to add my perspective to this because there is historical information that while it has been discounted in all of the reports or said to be non-existent, does indeed exist. It is with a heavy heart that I speak to you tonight about this proposal for putting this tower in the northeast corner of our green space in Water Tower Park. My parents' home, which was built 6 months before my birth, was carefully and painstakingly planned over a period of 10 years, designed and built by Lawrence's premier 1950s builder, Bob Still, who is considered a master of mid-century modern homes. One of his homes is on the historical register in Lawrence. This home that he built for my parents is an example of the extraordinary skill and expertise that he brought to his designs, his architecture, and his creation of homes. It was placed, my home, on the largest lot available at the corner of Oxford and Sunset in the newly, at that time, developing West Hills neighborhood in order to take advantage of the views of the park and to let in all the natural light. Bob Still carefully accommodated that natural light in this home design. Today, when you walk into the home, it is flooded with sunlight that this tower will entirely block. 4 generations of my family have lived in the home, spending time together while gazing at the park through the living room window that in the 1950s, my parents and subsequently in years to come, always called their picture window. The term picture window is unique to mid-century modern homes because they were designed with that window to be a focal point to create a picture of the surrounding environment. And that is indeed what they created, a picture of a beautiful park. We have loved that home. We have enjoyed looking through that window as we gather together at the tranquil green space before us. All 4 generations of my family have thoroughly enjoyed playing in that green space, just as so many families do today. My father and my husband and I taught my sons to play baseball on that little diamond, and my sons and I played baseball with my grandson right where you are proposing the new tower be built.
Mr. Chair.
My first grandson and I took long walks through that park when he was a toddler, along the path and through the grass, looking for rabbits and butterflies and dandelions to blow. And my father, at age 70 years, learned to cross-country ski in that park and did so with every snowfall until he moved when he remarried to Connecticut.
Thank you, Ms.
For
Zagerbrecht.
3 generations, Water Tower Park has provided neighborhood children with a safe place to gather and play, and also the safest walking and biking route to Hillcrest Elementary and West Junior High. Children were told by their parents for decades to take the path through the park and then the sidewalk down Hilltop all the way to Hillcrest School so that they would not encounter traffic anywhere along the way.
Thank you, Ms. Segebrecht. We're at 4 minutes now.
Place where my friends and I could gather when we were in junior high and we weren't driving yet. It was the place where children played games. It was the place of most of my childhood and adolescent memories.
Thank you, Ms. Segebrecht. We're well over 4 minutes.
One individual in West Hills speak in favor of this relocation of the tower to the northeast corner. And I believe that in the time of this COVID-19 crisis that is currently worsening by the day, it is most important that we not only maintain our green space, but we conserve our dollars. And all of the documents that you sent to us via email indicate that repairing this current tower will not only buy us 20 more years, but will save us in excess of $700,000.
Thank you, Ms. Segebrecht.
Finally,
We're at 5 minutes, ma'am.
it is important to point out a fallacy from the Zoom meeting that was held in July with all of you. There was one member of your planning commission who, when asked to address property depreciation in the area, said, and I quote, "We are not real estate experts, but we foresee no change in surrounding property values as a result of the relocation of the water tower." Because of her claim, I contacted 2 longtime realtors in Lawrence who are familiar with the West Hills neighborhood and listings and property values. I asked them about this, and both realtors informed me that my property value would decrease by $100,000. That is 1/2 of the value of my home. She also estimated, and the other person did too, that the property to the north of the park and the property to the south of my property would have a value decrease of $60,000 to $80,000. And the homes on Stratford Road that face the park were estimated to depreciate by $30,000 to $40,000. These are
Thank you, Mrs.
not
Segebrecht.
significant figures. And I think that the Planning Commission needs to take a very careful look at what the experts say, since you all have said that is not your expertise.
Thank you very much for your perspective, Mrs. Segebrecht. We are over 6.5 minutes. We need to
When
move
my
on to the
parents,
next.
Ray and Martha Jane Stoneback, purchased the lot, they were assured by the city that the green space would remain in perpetuity. The Register of Deeds and I have searched, and we cannot find a document on record, but that agreement was made between my parents and the Mossers, who built the house to the south of us, and Dr. Margaret Clark, who built the house to the north of the park. I believe that you need to show the integrity of listening to your predecessors that worked for the city and the promise that they made, and allow this green space and assure us that you will continue to allow this green space to thrive in perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Segebrecht. David Carter, Planning Commission Chair. I would just like to ask, I would like to remind
the people who are speaking that the limit is 3 minutes out of respect for all of the other people who are signed up. Next on the list is Stephen Segebrecht.
Hello. In light of the fact that the family has taken up a lot of time with the commissioners right now, all I'm going to say is that please review what Mr. Scannell has submitted to you. Very articulate, and I agree with him that we should go with his recommendation for proposal 1 and defeat the current recommendation that's before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Segebrecht. David Carter, Chair. Next on the list is Carol Jones. Is Ms. Jones on the call?
I'm Carol Jones. I'm Carol Jones. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm Carol Jones. I live at 1220 Sunset Drive, right across the street from the Water Tower Park. And I want to thank all of the members of the Planning Commission for your consideration of this issue and your service to us. I hope you've had time to read the packets. There are lots of great comments there, and I am very much in agreement with everyone who has spoken this evening that we are opposed to the proposed water tower and the location that has been proposed for it. I would just like to point out a couple of things in your packet materials that jumped out at me when I looked at those materials today. On page 16 of your packet materials for this agenda item, the agenda item of the special use permit application, and also Andrew Hansen showed part of this during his presentation as part of that Black and Veatch report that he and Leah Morris were presenting. There's a rendering of the existing water tower, one of the outbuildings, and the proposed new water tower. And that is not an accurate depiction of the size of the new water tower. It's in fact quite misleading. The water tower looks quite a bit smaller than the proposed new water tower looks quite a bit smaller than the existing tower. When we were shown this rendering months and months and months ago and asked about those relative sizes, we were told that in fact, and Andrew Hansen said in his presentation, and it's in the Black and Veatch report, that the heights of the towers are the same. So when you look at that rendering, you realize that the height of the tower is not correctly represented. And then since that rendering has been prepared, the pedestal diameter of the proposed water tower has been increased from something 20 feet something to 32 feet in diameter. And the size of the tank has been increased sizably from the proposed 500,000 gallons to 750,000 gallons. So in looking at that rendering, which is really the only thing that you have to look at that sort of fills in the your imagination for you about what it would look like in that space, keep in mind that the size of the water tower in that rendering is much too small. Everything about it is too small. Height and the tank and the pedestal. I also wanted to point out that on page 5 of
3 minutes. Sorry, Kyle Kobe with planning. We're at 3 minutes.
Ms. Jones, we're at 3 minutes.
All right.
You can have a few moments to wrap up.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. On page 5 of your agenda materials, I just wanted to point out there is a perfect illustration of how the open space in our beloved neighborhood park is going to be completely taken up by this proposed new tower. It is side by side an aerial photograph of the park, which shows perfectly the open space there, and next to it is the site plan, and you can see that the site plan shows that almost all of the existing open space is going to be used by the proposal. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ms. Jones. Appreciate it. David Carter, Chair. Next on the list is Charles Jones.
Hi. Thank you for taking time to listen to us. I sent to the Planning Commission a copy of an alternative study that was prepared by Black and Veatch, and I'm going to refer to that study in my comments. I want to take issue with the presentation that was made by Mr. Hansen about the kind of simple logic of replacing the existing tank. He talks about the idea that major structural repair is needed. I would reference page 20, excuse me for just a second. Page 23 of that report, in which it is concluded that the structural condition is adequate given its age. And to further that point, a table is given about repairs that would need to be made to bring it up to speed. And those repairs, even including those repairs, the cost of that repair would be significantly less than the cost of putting in the new tank by the tune of $1 million to $2.695 million. Mr. Hansen then talked about the idea of removal of lead paint causing problems to the health of the community. Well, if you look at alternative number 1, you can see that the recommendation is to encapsulate, not to remove the lead paint. I hope you can hear me. Okay. Finally, he said something about the finite life of the existing tank. Well, every piece of equipment has a finite life, but the life of the existing tank is supposed to be between 60 and 100 years. And in order to come up with a useful life, they sort of average that to 80 years. This tank has 60 years on it. What he's suggesting is that we simply throw away the remaining 25 years of useful life and build a new tank. Now, I'm not going to get into too much about this, but I recommend you look on page 27 about the engineering costs on this and ask yourself who's making the money, but the cost that's being recommended is $450,000 compared to $111,000 for simply repairing the existing tank. I want to point out a couple of other things. One is on the first page, they talk about putting in a new tank, but as Leah mentioned to you, there's still some question as to whether 3 of the remaining users will put up antennas on the new tank. Well, whoever did this report seems to anticipate that because they mention the fact that the the purpose of the study was to also consider a new monopole, which they believe would be required at an additional cost of $120,000. They've somehow deleted the cost from the cost of the actual construction of the new tank. So I'm afraid what might happen is that the idea of mounting on the pedestal will not be workable for some of the antennas, some of the communication providers, and that we'll see a second request to put up a monopole for that purpose. So I would say to you that their own study, Black & Veatch's own study, suggests that both in terms of initial cost and in terms of net present value, it makes more sense to fix what they've got. It also would be much better for our neighborhood. The final thing I want to bring up is, I want to bring up 2 things. One is, I'm vaguely offended at this notion that the Parks Department has its desires, and its desires are to put a new sidewalk across the park. Well, I live across the park. We are users of the park. The neighborhood is users of the park. And not once has the Parks and Recs Department approached us and said, what are our desires? What would we like to see happen? I would say to you as the Zoning Commission and the Planning Commission, wouldn't it make sense in terms of planning for us to take a holistic look at this property, both in terms of its utility usage and also its recreational usage, before we move ahead with the approval of this project? And secondly, the idea that moving the tower won't affect the property values of those who live in the shadow and beneath the tower is, by any stretch of common sense, pretty silly.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. We're at 4.5 minutes.
I think that the Planning Commission should demand a more complete study before making the decision to advance this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. David Carter, Chair. Next speaker is James Bartle. Is Mr. Bartle on?
Yes, hello. My name is James Bartle. I'm the owner of the property at 1642 Oxford Road. That house is at the corner of Oxford Road and Sunset Drive. And that intersection is the northeast corner of Water Tower Park. And I thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the application for the construction of a new water tank at the Water Tower Park. There are many reasons why this proposed project is not a good idea. I just want to address for you a point that's perhaps rather technical and has to do with the process and procedure by which this application comes to you for consideration this evening. I have submitted written comments. If you have a chance to read those, that would be great. But what you really need to do is read the letters that are attached to my written comments. These are letters sent by the city to property owners such as myself with regard to this project. the first letter I received was in the beginning of June, and that letter goes on to state that they propose to build a new water tank in the northwest corner of Water Tower Park, and that is where the existing water tank is located. There may have also been a communication sent in the middle of June. I don't have that for you, and I apologize for that. Then the latter part of June, there's another letter, because this matter gets continued for several months. This letter dated June 26th, it states on the front page that the new water tank is going to be constructed in the northwest corner. It states on the back page that the water tower is going to be constructed in the northeast corner. And then there were subsequent communications in July that don't even address where the tank is going to be located at all. So, it doesn't require any great leap in logic to conclude that the public has not been adequately informed about the true nature of this project, because you just get contradictory information and no correct information. There are fundamental principles of due process that are implicated here, and this hearing tonight is one step in the process by which government action is taken and the rights of citizens are affected. And when that happens, at an absolute minimum, the due process of law requires that the public receive notice and a chance to be heard. And of these two fundamental requirements, the most important one is notice. Because if you don't know what the government plans to do, you're never going to show up to say anything about it. The letters sent out by the city are contradictory, they're confusing, and in some cases, they're just not true. And that taints the legitimacy of this process, because the public has a right to know what's going on, and the city has the duty to tell the truth. So as I said, that is a procedural consideration that I hope you will keep in mind as you evaluate this, and in addition to the comments that go to the merits and the advisability of the project as a whole. And I thank you then for the chance to comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartle. Next on the list is Trip Frizzell.
Hi there. Thank you very much for letting me speak very briefly here. My wife, Allison, and I live over on West Hills Drive, so we're still a couple of blocks away from the tower, but we have used it, the park, significantly with our children who grew up in the area, and now with our grandchildren, and enjoyed the open space that's available. One thing I think we really liked is this started out as a neighborhood of college professors as KU was expanding, and the style of the existing towers, as well as where it was located, was very aesthetically appropriate for the area. What I liked about it was when we went there, you didn't see the tower. You didn't really notice the tower. It was a park, and you could use it as a park, and that's wonderful. I can't say the same thing about the proposed plan. The new water tower is not very attractive from my perspective, and it's going to be right in the middle of everything. And that'll change the look of the park, the way it's used by everybody. So to me, it's not the same thing. What I've heard tonight is significant neighborhood opposition to this plan, and yet I haven't seen any current numbers that would compare Plan 1, the existing plan, to put it, to keep the existing water tower and renovate it, to the other plans. I've seen plans or figures that are 6 years old, but that's a significant period of time. I guess I'm just disappointed that with all the neighborhood opposition, that there isn't a more up-to-date study that could look at this again and determine why really a new tower is better. So those are my thoughts, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frizzell. David Carter, Chair. Next on the list is Mark Bueller. Is Mr. Bueller on? Let's see. Let's see, Kyle, do you have Mark Bueller on the call?
I am looking right now.
Commissioners, if I may, this is Sandy Day. I had a phone conversation with Mark Bueller this afternoon, earlier today, and he was originally going to speak, and then he sent a communication, which which I believe is in the packet, and I'm sure he is watching this evening, but he may have chosen not to speak orally tonight.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Appreciate it. David Carter, Chair. With that, we'll move on to Melody Gatti, if Ms. Gatti is on.
I'm actually going to chime in. This is Joe Gatti. I'm at 1905 Oxford Drive. I'm actually under the water tower. You know, my concerns here, the bottom line is nobody wants this by their house. So, of course, she's leaving by my house, which I'm okay with. I'll keep this really brief. My biggest concern is the noise that is now put out by the electronics around the tower. Nobody that the city seems to be concerned with that. And I want to make sure that whatever design is done, whether this is reconditioned or a new one is made, that there is a attention paid to the noise from the pure electronics. So I'll keep it really brief so somebody else can have my minutes. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Gatti. Next is Todd Thompson. Mr. Thompson, you just need to unmute yourself. Very good, thank you.
I just have some questions. I've lived most of my life around the water tower. I moved here to Harvard Square. I lived on Hilltop Drive, just a couple of doors from the tower, and I now live on Westwood Road. It's been a central part of my life for 40 years. I would like to ask some questions. Is this a rush situation? Because it does seem to be being forced a little bit, and I think you should recommend denial so that there can be better time taken to study the alternatives. What is the compelling reason for moving or relocating the tower? It appears to me that it's just something about money and having the new one done before the other one comes down. That leads to these questions. Would there be any diminished service during the time of dismantling and construction? Those questions have not been addressed and have not been answered with any specificity. How long of a period of time would that be during the dismantling and rebuilding in the same location? Can you explain how the citizens would be impacted? I mean, no one has said that we won't have water. This is a system of multiple water towers that function together, and those towers, I believe, would still be able to provide water service. That issue has not been addressed, and I think it should be. There's a reliance feature. Everyone who lives around here bought their home with the tower knowing where it was, including Joe Gatti. And as he says, he's fine with that. But no one anticipated it being moved. So have you considered the reliance factor? I would ask you to do so. When I walked to school at KU, when I first moved here from Harvard Square, I walked down the little road on the side, on the north side of the park. That's a pedestrian path. That should not be turned into a driveway for service vehicles. And yet that's what this plan proposes. That alone should not be allowed. And a second driveway on Sunset really makes no sense. You have ordinances that protect residential areas. You don't allow a certain height of multifamily building built next to a single family dwelling. And yet you're now wanting to put this water tower next to Mike McGrew's home and across from the Segerbrecht's home, and yet you wouldn't allow a 3-story apartment to be built there. It doesn't make sense. You have ordinances to protect trees in the neighborhood next to single family dwelling. Why is this different? That's my question. The evaluation report is from 2014. It does need to be updated. And frankly, the alternatives need to be looked at and specifics provided as to what, if any, detriment would befall the citizens if the tower were placed back in the exact same spot where it is now.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Appreciate that. David Carter, Chair. Next is Michael McGrew.
I can assume there's the mute. My name's Mike McGrew, and I'm an owner and occupant at 1141 Sunset Drive, right next to the park. I've got several serious concerns about the proposed special use permit for the park. Number one, the need for a new tower has not been demonstrated. The current tower can continue to be maintained for at least the next 20 years. Number two, if the city decides not to maintain the existing tower and determines instead to improve the city water system with a new and larger tower, then the tower should be constructed on the exact location of the existing tower. Every property owner in the area has made their home purchase and property improvement decisions with reliance upon the existing specific water tower location. And I am a realtor, and I can tell you the desirability of a water tower next to your house versus no water tower next to your house, I think silly was already referenced. For 60 years, the Water Tower Park has been used daily by neighbors and university students. It's not a remote, undeveloped piece of ground on which a water tower can be built without consequence or negative impact to many adjacent homeowners and neighbors. Number four, the city reports that the city water system capacity is 6.9 million gallons. This water tower capacity is 500,000 gallons, which is about 7% of the system capacity. This cannot be a significant diminishment, even though it's temporary, of water capacity if the current tower is first removed and then a larger one built in its place. In the event that the city so desires, they could put in a temporary pump and ground tank, as was discussed earlier, at the park until the new tower is completed, with any temporary pump tank costs considered essential to do the least permanent harm to the park and the neighborhood. Number five, if no other location can be used to accommodate Douglas County emergency communications, then that can be done by a temporary single monopole tower at minimal cost. Number six, the opportunity exists to actually improve Water Tower Park. A new single column tower with concrete base can house the Douglas County EMS equipment without any separate additional buildings. There are 5 buildings underneath the tower right now. This provides increased usable park area, better and simpler security. Future cell company space, if desired, can be built into the single base building. Sprint, as you indicated, is not located at the water tower. You know that Sprint and T-Mobile have gone through a merger. T-Mobile now owns Sprint's assets. T-Mobile may decide not to rebuild in that tower location. If the city wishes to upgrade the city water system, then every effort should be made to improve Water Tower Park and protect the quality of life for all of the many and future homeowners in the immediate neighborhood. At the very least, Water Tower Park and the neighborhood should not be made to suffer significant permanent negative impact in order to make incremental enhancement to the entire city water system. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. McGrew. David Carter, Chair. Next on the list is Phil Struble. Is Mr. Struble on? Let's see. While we wait for Mr. Struble, our last speaker on the list is Steve Scannell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder, before I start, don't count this on my time, are we going to be allowed to comment after this item 2 on the agenda?
Well, this is items 1 and 2.
Okay. So we're only getting 3 minutes total for both items. I just wanted to merge mine together and comment later if I could, so I could hear all of the presentation by staff before I comment.
Fair point. And frankly, I wish we'd had that discussion before. It's a fair point. I recognize that you also submitted a rather lengthy communication today, and I'm sure there will be questions from the commission. So I would ask you to try to keep as close to 3 minutes as possible, but understand that you've got quite a lot to say, so please continue.
So just go ahead now. There won't be public comment later?
There will be questions from the commission.
Okay.
To speakers. I understand a lot. I think we've all been taking notes, and so a lot of points have been made during these comments, and we'll be addressing questions to the public.
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you again. My name's Steve Scannell. I live at 1005 Sunset Drive. I'm about 2 blocks north of the Water Tower Park. My wife and I walk it virtually every day. I am a licensed architect, worked for 19 years in private practice, and for the last 23 years at KU as assistant director for the KU Facilities Planning and Development Office. So in that capacity, I work with architects and engineers reviewing projects like this quite a bit. So I am recommending to the Planning Commission that you deny these 2 agenda items for a number of reasons. As you've seen from all the previous commenters, that we are in pretty unanimous agreement that the proposed water tower in the east location is incompatible with the scale and the site design of adjacent uses. The park is that east half of the park is the open play field, and basically what's proposed is to install what is an enormously tall industrial structure in that open space, and it will with the solid base that's proposed in lieu of the legged base, would close off that side of the park substantially. It would also cast significant shadows. I don't think the shadow diagram, although the engineer said that it was done by a 3D CAD program, it did not look like anything that I've seen that would be an actual casting of a shadow from a round object onto the ground. And so I don't think it's accurately represents what we would see, and doesn't take into account the sun angles from winter and summer. I do agree with my neighbors. I think this would have a very negative impact on property values because all the homes were built or renovated with the tower in its current location. Moving it will definitely have an effect. And if a home is affected by the shadowing and they wanted to put up solar panels, there's another impact into the future. The cost impacts of the new tower, I don't think they've really been presented. If you look at the Black and Veatch report, and my written comments are much better than I'm doing here, I apologize, but the Black and Veatch report basically says that it's about $1 million in 2014 to encapsulate and renovate the current tower, leave the lead paint, $1.5 million if you abate it, and $2.7 million if you build a new tower. That's a significant cost savings, a significant difference, and in the current financial situation, that should really be considered strongly. I think it's also very misleading and incorrect that they did not include the telecommunication issues and address them. It feels like the city and the Planning Commission would be making an only partially informed decision. We don't know if they're going to want to remain on the tower. The rendering that was presented doesn't show anything on the tower. It could end up looking like kind of what's there now, which is frankly pretty ugly. And so I think that needs to be considered. A monopole might be a better option, but does it have to be at this site? And if so, where would it be located and what would it look like? I think those things should be considered. Same thing with the buildings, the emergency generators, and all those things that are currently there now, as well as fencing and other components that they might want. What I've outlined in my comments to you were 3 options. One is to
recommending that first you choose to renovate the existing tower. It's lowest cost. It has no impact at all on the aesthetic quality or functional use of the park or on the surrounding homes. As Black and Veatch's report said, the repairs completed, tank would have another 20 years of additional life before decommissioning. And I would just say that at KU, we would definitely stretch that to at least 30 or 40 years. And their own report would say that that's also a reasonable expectation. Option 2 would be, if you're not in favor of supporting that option, then, and this is perhaps the right thing to do, would be to tear down the current tower and build a new tower in its place. Again, it would have no adverse impact on the park or property values. And it does have that added benefit, as the Black and Veatch report and the city report indicated, that the composite tower base can be used for storage. All of the county EMS equipment could be placed in the base of the tower, and it could be secured. It would be out of sight, secured from the public. If there are concerns about maintenance staff, you put it in a wire cage, and that's separately lockable. But it gives an opportunity to remove all of that industrial buildings and functions, the noise of the air conditioning systems that Joe Gaddy mentioned, and things of that type.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
I'll wrap up.
Thank you.
So, and I mentioned, and I think it's worth saying, that, future generations will never know what a project like this cost or how long it took to get done, but they'll always know if it wasn't done right. And if renovating the current tower isn't felt to be the right thing to do, definitely tearing down the current tower and building a new tower in its place is the right thing to do, in the best interest of the city and our neighborhood. So I'll just stop there, and hopefully can deal with some other things later.
Thank you, Mr. Scannell.
Okay,
David,
thank you.
David, absolutely. David Carter, Chair. Kyle, before we wrap up, I just want to double check. Is there any sign of Phil Struble?
Kyle Kobe was planning.
I have a Philips iPhone that recently joined the meeting. I think that might be who we're looking for.
Okay, Mr. Struble, are you on the?
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Thank you, and apologize for that. And I had just signed up in the event that there were any of ideas that I had that had not been addressed tonight. And one of them is, I think this is a great opportunity to go back and look at rebuilding the tower in its original place. And it was pointed out earlier this evening that 10 years ago was when we built the Stone Ridge water tower, which a lot of people have referred to. 11 years ago, we didn't have that capacity in our system. Yet in the last 10 years, we have not grown that much. And so I think there's an opportunity probably to be creative and look at what our existing capacity is, and maybe not necessarily have to build temporary storage of 100% of that water to supply the fire protection and the needs of the neighborhood. So I think there's an opportunity here probably to send this back and have Black and Veatch and the city MSO staff revisit this, knowing the fact that they need to look a little harder at rebuilding the tower in its existing place or renovating it after they've heard the amount of opposition to building a new tower in the new location. So with that, I would thank you for hearing my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Struble. David Carter, Chair. Kyle, could you please
confirm if there's anyone in the chamber who's shown up to speak on this item?
Kyle Kobe with Planning. I can confirm that no one is in City Commission chambers to speak on this.
Okay, thank you very much. So with this, I'm going to give the applicant a chance to respond. And just as
order, with two items, we've got 5 minutes, and admittedly, we held to the 3-minute limit as much as possible for public comment. But we do have two items here. So I'm going to ask the applicant to please keep within 10 minutes for the response. We have quite a few items that have been brought up among these 16 speakers. And let's see, Ms. Morris, did you want to respond?
Yes, Leah Morris, Treatment Divisions Manager.
And the public made some very good points. We've been paying attention to the correspondence that has been coming in from the public when presenting to both the public as well as this meeting, try and address all the points. I understand that there's an aesthetic connection to the tower. You know, one of the points that we have stated before that I want to harp on again is that the type of tower, the multi-leg that's there now, if we were to replace with a similar tower in that way, there's only one manufacturer of that tower that meets the recommendations of design, and putting the city in a monopoly in terms of the bidding isn't financially savvy or smart for the city's rate dollars. You know, there was some question about housing the EMS structure within the city building. The separate building was requested and mandated by Douglas County EMS, and it's a part of their federal permit. So that was discussed previously with Douglas County Emergency Management, and it was per their directive that they have a separate building and separate security that, you know, they couldn't really house within the tower. So that would be directed to them. And then Black and Veatch, as part of the 2014 and part of our modeling, did look at, you know, taking down the tower in terms of being able to provide the city fire protection and serviceability without the tower in order to construct in the same place. It was not doable. We would not achieve fire demand during that because of the volume that it holds and because of that central location of the tower. And that's why we went over that this tower is very important. It gets the highest turnover in terms of the towers that serve this West Hills side. You know, I understand the attachment to where the tower is located now within the park versus the other quadrants. We really tried to evaluate that ideally in terms of looking at all of the features in the park and which one would serve both the city and the residents in the best capacity. You know, there are other things that we can look at in terms of the separate drives. We can look at permeable pavers and behind the sidewalk so that it's not a concrete drive all the way to the tower. The shared use path to the north of the site is currently there, and it's serving as a drive to the facility building for EMS. That made financial sense, and replacing what's there currently. And then ultimately, I just want to make sure that everybody understands and is reminded that the tower meets the needs of serviceability and demand. And in order to maintain the existing tower, we're only really purchasing maybe 10 years of protection from that. Especially in the coatings. It is not recommended to encapsulate the coatings again because of the rate of failure that they are showing. So by putting forth such a large sum of money to only buy, potentially 10 years of service out of that existing tower, we're really just prolonging the inevitable. We will be at this point again where the tower does have to be replaced. So we're trying to be financially savvy with our city dollars, especially our rate dollars as we improve our utilities and public works side, and we try and make decisions based on that. And I maintain, and the city staff and planning staff and Douglas County will maintain that this is the financially savvy and smart decision on the city's behalf. Andrew Hansen with Black and Veatch, do you have anything to add in response to the public comments?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Andrew Hansen with Black and Veatch. Mr. Struble brought up a good point relative to Stone Ridge and having more storage than historically had been within the West Hill service level. But from a technical perspective, I mean, it's a very keen insight. However, you must realize that when Stratford was built, there was no Clinton water treatment plant. All the water came from Caw, and it was kind of floating out on the edge. Now that Clinton has been built, there's a huge transmission main that goes up Wakarusa, and another big transmission main that goes across 6th Street, which services both of those towers at Stone Ridge and the 6th Street tank. So the conveyance of water between those facilities is much easier hydraulically. You look at the Stratford tank and it's isolated and connected to a bunch of 6 and 8 inch mains that don't have nearly the same carrying capacity and does not allow water to move freely from those other tanks down into the Stratford area. And as I'd commented on one of my slides, they really, while they do function together, they serve their own respective areas relative to meeting those peak demands and fire flows. There was a comment by Ms. Jones relative to the rendering being too small, and I would have to see this, the specific rendering that she was referring to, but I can assure you that they were all done to the 132-foot height. And so it's kind of like holding the big fish up in front of the camera. It kind of depends on where you're standing, if it, you know, relative to where that, what direction that rendering was taken from. So we can go back and confirm that for the commission if you would like, but 99% certain that they were all modeled at 132 feet. That's the only comments I had. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks to you both, David Carter, Chair. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the commission for any questions to staff, the applicants, or to the public. Who would like to begin? And we have 2 screens, so if I don't see you when you raise your hand, please just state your name.
Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First thing, apologize for not being able to divulge ex parte communications earlier. It did take me longer to sign on than I had planned. I did have conversations with Mr. Bartle about this and his objections to it. We talked about the project, and really we didn't discuss anything that hasn't already been brought up. We discussed a lot of the Black and Veatch report. I've got several questions for staff, but I'll only ask a couple and let other commissioners have a chance to interact. One of the concerns that a neighbor brought up was with trees being cut down. I see the site plan, but, and maybe this is too detailed of a conversation, of a question, but for staff, do we know at this point which trees are being cut down, which ones are being retained?
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. I'm going to defer to Andrew Hansen for this, as Black and Veatch has prepared the site plan.
Yeah, Andrew Hansen with Black and Veatch. The location that was picked was specifically moved far enough south to avoid the large trees on the northeast corner of the lot. So you need a certain clearance around it to obviously construct it as well as maintain it. And so that's the buffer that we picked away from existing large trees. I believe there was a couple small trees that were planted fairly recently along the western edge of the property that would be relocated, but there are no significant trees being removed under the project.
Okay, thank you. And then here's an easy question, probably Andrew, this probably for you again. The timeline, can you refresh me on the timeline for, let's assume that the project goes forward. How soon after the old, how soon after the new tank is built does the old tank come down? June 2022. Sorry, I found it. Sorry about that.
Anything further, Mr. Sands?
No, I saw that one. I couldn't find it earlier. I don't know why I couldn't find it.
And Commissioner Sands, Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager, just so I can comment on that. We're also coordinating with Douglas County Emergency Management on that. So they play a big role in when that tower does come down. in terms of them removing their equipment and either relocating or putting new equipment on the new tower. They're in current, bid for that. So it would also depend on their timeline as far as the equipment and if they were going to do new equipment versus relocate the old, and what the contractor was going to do for them as well. But we would be in communication with them about that. So just to clarify.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up the cell tower issues. Someone brought up, and I'm not sure who. Maybe it was Mr. McGrew. I've done a little bit of work adjacent with the telecommunications industry, specifically on projects like this for my my regular job. And what I will say is, I don't think it's wise to assume that the other service providers will not want to relocate either onto the new tower or onto a separate tower. One of the things that Leah, you just brought up was there may be another tower have to go into place to service the three major service providers. And presumably that would also require, and I think it's on the site plan, I'm having trouble finding it, server buildings to service each of those. And that doesn't seem to be reflected on the site plan. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, Commissioner Sands, this is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. So without having commitment from any of the three cellular providers, and we have been in communication with them for over a year now in terms of the forward moving plan, and the milestones we're trying to achieve and trying to get their commitment one way or the other. So without the commitment, we didn't feel like it would be an accurate depiction to show those additional buildings, but we have, stated that we feel that the Planning Commission and that the planner associated with any additional special use permit out of a potential monopole, which would be completely separate from this project, would maintain that the buildings would have to be, located in that similar area and be aesthetically similar to what we're proposing now, which has been the communication with them as well in terms of co-locating on the tower. That way, in my opinion, the existing tower, it kind of has what a lot of different buildings underneath the tower now, and we want to be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing than that in terms of providing something uniform. So I would anticipate that the planner associated with that additional permit, if one comes forward, would also maintain that. And I think that the city would support that as a whole.
Okay, what about the second tower to support if the panels can't be put in? I know you said that you can't plan it because it doesn't come and get in touch with you. The problem I see with that, though, is that there's the city doesn't have a whole lot of control and authority to exercise if a tower needs to go up, and so I'm worried about if the new structure can't fulfill the need for each of the service providers that are already there. We are going to get stuck with having to approve an additional tower, which is going to. I don't want to speculate too much, but if I were a betting person, I would bet that it would go in the northeast corner and it would be fenced off and it'd be not attractive. It would not be of a uniform design pattern that you explained earlier. So I've got a lot of concerns about the potential risk of having a second tower go up and ruin all this good work that you guys are trying to do. Can you comment a little bit on the second tower?
So Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager, the potential of a second tower would be solely upon any other third-party carrier that would not be related to this project or, the utilities and Douglas County Emergency Management. Currently, the cellular providers are located on top of the existing tower. And in terms of in discussion with the department as a whole, it's the preference of the department to maintain that the top of the tower is for city infrastructure as well as Douglas County infrastructure, limiting the amount of access to the top of the tower and everything else. But if they couldn't be serviced, which has not been the case in the past, or what has been presented in terms of to us as the project managers and the planner and everybody else associated with the project, I think that there would be conversations in terms of the potential of co-locating on the top of the tower, depending on what kind of requirements that they had. But we would have to understand what kind of space needs that they had and everything else. And at that point, without, you know, communication from them stating what their needs are and what the equipment that they need to host up there is, it's hard to determine the space need of that. So ultimately, we just want to make sure that everybody understands that we're trying to be facilitating of the current carriers in order to co-locate them on the tower and make that a reasonable location, which, you know, the department and the advisors feel that this is. But ultimately, it's on the cellular providers to determine if they want to co-locate or not, and then it would be upon the discretion of the planning commission, just like every special use permit is, in order to allow that in whatever capacity or not. And Sandy, can you chime in if you have any additional thoughts? You're kind of better on the cellular providers than I am.
Thank you. Sandy Day, Planning Office. We've had a lot of discussion internally about the cellular provider question, if you will. Without a commitment, obviously the city cannot make some final determinations. And Randy may correct me if I stray too far on this one as well, but the property is owned by the city. The city does not necessarily have to make an agreement with someone to build the tower that the communication carriers would co-locate on. And that's how we see a lot of the towers themselves are usually constructed by, say, American Tower, and then they have sublease agreements with the carriers to co-locate on that. And I don't know that the city has agreed to giving up more of the park for that particular purpose. The difficulty will be that if not there, where? And we have had some carrier representatives of the carriers contact us to look at opportunities in other parts of the neighborhood. There's not a lot of ideal places. The reason that the park and that location is beneficial to the water tank and elevation is also beneficial to the carriers in their elevation plans. If they co-locate on the tower at a lower elevation than what they have today, they probably would be looking for secondary and third site locations within the community to get that. So when you have lower towers, a lot of times you have more of them. What kind of changes those carriers can do with some of their small cell work, with other technologies, may be opportunities for them to co-locate on utility poles and light poles and other opportunities. They haven't expressed those plans to us, and they usually will not until they have exhausted all possibilities. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Sandy. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Sands, are your questions answered?
Yeah, I'll shut up for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Ashworth.
Ashworth, unless anybody wants to continue with the telecommunications, I have a couple other questions. First, I'd like to ask Leah Morris and Andrew Hansen to clarify. As I was listening, I heard that replacing the tower, putting the new tower in the same place as the existing tower is not necessarily impossible, but that it would cost upwards of $1 million more. Is that correct?
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Yes, Commissioner Ashworth, that is correct. And, you know, facilitating that would be really quite challenging. There would have to be a temporary tank to store 500,000 gallons, because that's the existing volume, and then a corresponding pump station to deliver the pressure of water that the serviceability and fire protection demands out of the West Hills side. And this kind of facility is not really recommended because we're trying to protect the city's potable water system, and there's a lot of security issues with that. So to have a temporary tank, you know, that's on a site, as well as a large pumping apparatus that has to be maintained and fueled, and ultimately, you know, it's going to be its own kind of separate project in terms of that. Just looking at the rental cost of the tank and the pump is, you know, we're approaching $1 million. That does not include any kind of contractor staff time to maintain and fuel. I'm not sure if we would have to have redundancy in that pumping. If a pump fails, you know, where does that leave us, or what the turnaround time, which again would be on a contractor's bid for, you know, making sure that we have the demand that we require, as well as the fueling that I think I mentioned. And so we looked at past projects, Black and Veatch's, as well as city potential, and looked at costs affiliated with that. And, you know, at that type of cost, over $1 million at that point, above a 3.8 total budget, it seems like that's, again, not a financially savvy way to spend city dollars. And that doesn't include any kind of additional site work that removing the existing tower would then demand, like completely removing the footings, which go down who knows how far, in order to build new footings, which, you know, demolishing the existing tower with a new tower already in place, it wouldn't require full depth excavation of the footings. So again, there's an added cost with that as well. So there's a lot of things to consider, but I do maintain that it wouldn't be financially smart with city rate dollars to spend the money in that way.
Thank you. And just a technical question. What is the base of the existing tower with the legs? So the new tower is going to be 70, what did I read? 72 foot base. What is the base of the existing tower?
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Andrew, I'm going to defer to you on this one, if you probably have the site plan measurable in front of you.
Yeah, I do, but I'm sorry I don't have a scale with me or anything to measure. I want to, I'll check on that. I can go on to Google Earth, probably, and measure. I think it's somewhere in the 80-foot range, but I can go to Google Earth and measure it.
I think that would be helpful as we look at an aerial view here. We kind of get a better idea of that comparison from another angle, if we knew what the base of that existing structure was. And then my last question for now, actually just a couple, or another clarification. I read in the Black and Veatch report, one of the statements was that repairing the existing tower would give 20 years of life to the existing tower, but then I also heard 10 years in the commentary this evening.
Yes, Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. The biggest thing on the 10-year purchase is the coatings. The coatings would need to be, again, redone in another 10 years. So when you're putting forth a lot of money to, you know, take care of the lead-based coatings and recoat, we would have to, again, recoat the tower in 10 years. So the structural improvements would potentially buy, you know, up to 20 years according to the report, but we would still have to recoat the tower again in 10 years, which is a significant cost, again, to the city to not buy a whole lot of life out of that existing tower. Andrew Hansen, do you have any more to comment on that?
No, it's accurate. Andrew Hansen, Black and Veatch.
Thank you for that clarification. And then my last question. I walked around that park the other day, took a bunch of pictures looking at it, and I'm just curious as to the location for the new one is in the northeast quadrant. but I'm wondering why it has to be moved so far west. What are the possibilities of moving it to more of a central north location? So not only is it moved from the Hilltop address, which, by the way, I have to agree, that is a very noisy area, and whatever's happened, I would think that noise mitigation would be part of this. Just not quite so far west. I don't know if the community would be interested in that, but I'm just curious as to why that far west and not more central location in the northern section of the park.
Andrew, I'm going to, Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Andrew, I'm going to defer to you on this.
Andrew Hansen, Black and Beach. When we were evaluating the site, again, relative to working with the existing utilities, safely constructing the tank and being clear from the existing tank, the length of the driveways, we just felt that moving to the closer to the road was a better option from a constructability standpoint and cost standpoint.
And Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager, we were also trying to evaluate the best location to protect the existing trees, to construct around those, to not have to remove those as well, which we've identified as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. I just want to get a little additional information from Leah Morris about what would be entailed in rebuilding at the existing site. You went over substituting a temporary tank and pump to make up for the loss of this tank for the water system. But how would the emergency management use of that and their current building, and also the current use of the existing water tower for telecommunications in town, how would all that play out with trying to rebuild a tower at the same site?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. That's one thing that I can't really comment on in terms of Douglas County emergency management. I can make a, an assumption that they would also have to put something up temporarily in order to house their infrastructure, and the city also will have infrastructure at that time for their AMI system located on the tower that they would have to temporarily relocate, and again adding cost not only to the city but also to the county at that point. And that also kind of dictates why it's not really feasible for them to have to relocate in a temporary position and then, either locate back or, having a permanent location, therefore creating two towers again in the park. That would have to be a conversation with Douglas County Emergency Management, who is not on the call tonight, but that should be considered in terms of the capabilities, in terms of relocating in the exact location that it would negatively affect both government entities participating in this project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners?
Chair Carter, may I ask a question? This is Commissioner Butler.
Please. Commissioner Butler, please.
And my question is for Ms. Morris and Mr. Hansen. If I understand what you guys are telling us is that if the water tower stays where it is, in 10 years, you will have to go back and do more work to it, correct? And then in another 10 years, you'll have to go back and do more work to the tower. Is that correct?
Commissioner Butler, this is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Yes, you are correct. If we did make structural improvements and redo the coatings now, in 10 years, we would have to redo the coatings minimally if there were no additional structural need at that point to make additional structural improvements. And then it would not be recommended to do additional structural improvements in another 10-year fashion, therefore 20 years from now. because at that point we have met the service life of the tower. So it would not be the recommendation of any engineer that I would know of in order to keep that tower in service versus a new tower. And then we would be at this exact same point again.
Okay, so your point is that we're really discussing using dollars today to rebuild or repair the tower versus it's going to have to be replaced no matter what in the next 20 to 30 years. Is that correct?
Commissioner Butler, Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Yes, that is correct. And I think that, 10 to 20 years is probably on the hopeful side in terms of the structural improvements that, will probably need to be made. So yes, we would just be delaying the spending of those dollars in, less than 20 years.
And so I've heard all of the neighbors talk about, the use of the park and their family history kind of in that surrounding area. What, besides Mr. Senecal, I believe, or Scannell, and he had, one of his options or one of the options he proposed was building at the same site, which we've just been talking about. Is there no other option, I guess, to try to work with the neighbors to facilitate not having to demolish that water tower, build something on the other side? Is there not is it not possible to build behind where the existing water tower is? I'm just kind of struggling to see something else.
Commissioner Butler, Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. We did evaluate all quadrants of the site. The quadrant directly to the south, which would be the southwest quadrant, that currently holds lots of established trees, as well as the park equipment that everybody has spoken so lovingly about in terms of their kids and grandchildren using that. So is it possible to build on that part of the site? It is, but again, when we evaluated the site as a whole, we felt like there was going to be a better option in building it in the northeast versus the southwest because of the existing established trees and the park equipment and the potential for rock on the site, which the geotechnical exploration showed that there was rock towards the south of the site, therefore potentially adding cost to the project depending on the design. So is it possible? It is. But, whether we take it to the south or to the east, again, we're talking about moving it. And it was the thought of the Parks Department as well as additional city staff that by preserving the equipment and the established trees, that would be in the benefit of keeping that park functional while in construction through the majority of it, as well as for the future until the Parks Department had the master plan for that park specified and delineated. And Andrew Hansen, is there anything else that you can comment on in terms of that?
The only other thing that comes to mind for me is, the sewers to the north. That is challenging to go uphill with sewer. When we first looked at the site, there was some, discussion about the southwest location, and recognized that we were taking out the play sets as well as disturbing a lot more of the large, a lot of large trees down in that area. And so with those two things in opposition, we moved away from it pretty quickly.
Thank you.
And,
Commissioner Willie.
Sorry, that's Andrew Hansen, Black and Beach. And also recognizing that once the existing tank goes away, there's going to be a huge green space there that's usable, that's never been usable before.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Commissioner David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie.
Willie, Planning Commissioner. So is there a way to evaluate, or has there been a discussion with the neighborhood about what the value is based on the proposed location versus the location where the swing sets are? I know that means there are more trees that would be bothered. There's the swing sets, which could be relocated. Has there been a discussion with the neighbors, or could we get an understanding from the neighbors of what they would value based, the east side or the southwest corner? And I guess that is a question for Ms. Morris and Mr. Hanson. But if we want to, I think we have a pretty good selection of the neighborhood that we could ask.
Commissioner Willie, this is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. No, public input was not sought in terms of looking at one quadrant versus the other on the project. And we are more than willing to take that input, in terms of other past projects and just the historical nature of other projects here. It would be perceived that there would be a good attachment to, the existing park structure and the existing established trees. But if the public has an overwhelming, sense that it would prefer to take those out and go in that direction, we can absolutely evaluate that, and we're open to that as a department.
Thank you. Commissioner Ashworth.
Real briefly, sorry for my being directionally challenged last time. I meant, why was it going so far east and not that north central? But going for sort of piggybacking on Commissioner Willie's comments, can I ask, I guess, Mr. Scannell, who had suggested that southwest corner, to talk further about why that location was preferred, given the trees would have to come out and given the playground equipment would have to come out, and if he has a sense of what his neighbors thought of that idea.
This is Steve Scannell. I would be very happy to speak to that. Thank you for allowing me the chance to. If the city staff could show on the screen or allow me to share the site plan where that's attached at the end of my comments, that would be great. But otherwise, I would just ask the commissioners to take reference to that. I didn't have a chance to touch on my option 3, which is to recommend, if you're not willing to renovate the existing, you're not willing to build a new one where the existing one is, then I definitely recommend that the Planning Commission deny the permit tonight and direct the engineer and city staff to build it on the southwest quadrant. It is far superior for lots of reasons. It does not have any impact, again, on the primary open area, which is that east half. And if you look at the site plan, it's actually the east 2/3 of that current Water Tower Park area. It preserves the openness of the park along Sunset Drive, which is where people park and pedestrians access it. And, families come to and do the kickball and all the football and all that. The southwest corner is definitely feasible. The idea of bedrock, I'm really questioning why that's an issue. That would seem to be a good thing, because an immense structure like this is going to need footings founded in rock, whether it's with drilled piers or pilings that are sunk into that rock. That would actually reduce your cost, I would think, if the rock is closer to the surface and you have a shorter pier or piling to set it on. The idea of utilities, the stormwater overflow would go to the southeast corner no matter where you put it. So that doesn't change, you're actually closer. The storm sewer or the sanitary sewer that I believe they have shown going to the north behind the McGrews could go to the east. There's an easement, I believe, between the properties on the east side, and it wouldn't be that difficult to make a connection there. But if you had to go to the north, you could do that too, and I think that also works. The footprint that I've shown there in that southwest quadrant with the red solid line is the base, the same one that's shown, the 32-foot diameter base on the northeast quadrant. The overhang I've shown is the 60-foot or whatever it was for the 500K tank, a 750K tank would be just slightly larger, but it still all fits. And the third line is the 15-foot maintenance buffer. It all fits. You can build it there while you keep the current tower and the current fenced area intact. And I've shown a driveway coming straight from Stratford. If we can talk to the Douglas County EMS folks and come up with a plan to secure their stuff inside the base of the tower, then you can really clean this up, eliminate all the fencing, and provide a ton more openness, and then it becomes a much less obtrusive issue. And you can move the tower from where I've shown it, I think, a little further north. If, however, they need to have separate buildings, I also had an earlier sketch, but didn't want to complicate things and show it, that showed you could put a single driveway to the west of the current tower base in that location I've shown. It could run up to the north and actually into the existing fenced yard, but you can reconfigure that and put the EMS structures and any other structures, should you choose to have them, on either side of that road that just runs north-south. And then you have a T road that runs to the east to the base of the tower. So it's much simpler. You have a single road. You don't have the shared use of a sidewalk that becomes a road, unless you wanted to do that with the sidewalk on the west side of the property there, which is not as heavily used as the one along the north. Sun shadows, the solar shadow issue and all that is another benefit of this plan, because any shadows cast by the tower on the southwest are falling in the park. They're not falling on the residences to the north or to the east. So all the advantages are here. The idea that you're moving it because of the trees, which, by the way, I don't know that there was a condition study done of the trees, but the two trees that are there that are large that would have to come out are both near the end of their life. And if you go look at them, they have a lot of dead branches. And so removing them is not really a loss. And if you do what we do at KU and you plant 2 trees to replace them, you're ahead. Oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought, but the playground equipment. If you're using playground equipment as a reason for not doing it, again, I have to say that's kind of ridiculous. And it makes you wonder, things like the misleading rendering and those kind of arguments feel like, in all honesty, that this was a preconception and you're trying to go somewhere else. But anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to speak. I'll calm down and be quiet now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scannell. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie, it looks like you have another question.
I don't think questioning everybody's motives is a helpful place to go with this. I think there was an assumption made that we always would hear from neighbors if we were taking out big trees. So I think the assumption was going to the open space was likely to be more acceptable to the neighborhood. I think asking will be much more useful. So we have to get more than just one opinion here, but because taking out big trees is always a big deal in a neighborhood park. But it sounds like that I'm sorry, I'm talking. It sounds like the open space that's used for the kickball and baseball and that sort of thing is a higher priority possibly in the neighborhood, and that preserving that might be the value. I think there needs to be another. I don't want to punt on our responsibility or kick this back necessarily, but we always ask an applicant to have really good conversations with the neighborhood for any other project that comes forward. And though I know we will not satisfy all of the concerns that are brought forward, because I, for one, just can't stomach the additional cost and the additional hassle of trying to replace it in the exact same location. But I do think that there could be some discussion with the neighborhood about are there locations that are, even if the rock may cost a little bit more, the foundation may cost a little bit more, is there a give and take here that the neighborhood is more comfortable with? So is there an avenue for that besides this meeting that Ms. Morris and Mr. Hansen would be interested in having those discussions with the neighborhood, or do we need to just kind of canvass the people that we have here and try and make that work for both conversations?
Sorry, Commissioner Willie, is that last part a question for staff, perhaps?
It could be a question for either our planning staff or for the city staff that's available.
Very good.
Jeff, would you like to take that?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. If I understand the Commissioner's question correctly, is the question to the avenues open to the Commission for the item this evening?
Sure. I know we've asked in the past to have applicants have larger discussions with the neighborhood. Should that happen here, or is there an avenue for us to ask for that and not wanting to delay the project considerably, but is that a possibility?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. The only concern I would have about having it at this meeting this evening is that people may want to participate in that meeting but not participate in the Planning Commission meeting. So that may be an item of concern, is that we are narrowing the discussion to those present, not versus those who want to be here in the evening. So that would be an item of my concern that I would have on that front there. The powers before the board this evening is to just kind of remind the Commission and also share with people who might not be familiar with the Planning Commission's role in this one is the Commission is a recommending body, so the ultimate approval of this would be with the City Commission. So the Planning Commission this evening has the ability to recommend approval with conditions, deny the request, or also, recommend denial of the request, or defer the item for further information. So that is the item before you this evening. But again, like I mentioned earlier, my concern with using this meeting as a public meeting is that there may be more people that would like to participate that are not here this evening because it was not aware to them.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie, do you have any follow-up comments or questions?
I think maybe the avenue that's open to us, because I am fully in favor of moving forward with a new water tower here. I think that's the most cost-effective thing. I do think that there needs to be some more discussion with the neighborhood about where that might be acceptable to both the city parties and the neighborhood. I think we probably, if we decide to go down this route, if other people are in agreement, could recommend it with the condition that there be, because we're not recommending that, we're not having the preliminary plat before us. Is that right? We just have the special use permit, which is the idea of the new water tower? Or no, Sandra is saying that no, we have to have a location before we can move forward. Is that right, Sandra?
No, there are two separate, I'm sorry, Sandy Day Planning Office. So you do have two separate items. Regardless of where the tank is located within the park, the property does need to be platted. So the plat can live independent of where the location of that water tower ends up. Special use permit is that piece that Jeff was talking to you about in terms of your role as an advisory board to recommend that that tower be located in a different portion or different quadrant of the park. The applicant needed to do enough engineering to show feasibility of a project, which is the result of the site plan that you see tonight.
Thank you, Sandy. Commissioner Carpenter. You're on mute.
Pushed the wrong button, sorry. Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. Sandy, just for a little clarification, the preliminary plat, that is approval only by the Planning Commission. We don't recommend it forward that to the City Commission, correct?
Sandy Day Planning Office, Commissioner Carpenter, that is correct.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. So with building on what Commissioner Willie brought up, we can certainly discuss approval of the preliminary plat, since we do have to plat this property without setting an exact location of the water tower. We could require a condition of additional meetings with the neighborhood about possible placement in that southwest quadrant. Is that correct?
Sandy Day Planning, was that a question to staff?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I'm going to stick with staff just to clarify just what our options are here tonight.
The Planning Commission, Sandy Day Planning Office, the Planning Commission does have an option to defer the special use permit and request additional information. That is one of your options, and that could be provision of a revised site plan that shows an alternative location for public comment.
Okay. Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. We have 3 votes tonight. One is just a preliminary plat to plat this property. 2 is the associated variance for the street width, which is pretty standard to allow us to maintain the current right-of-way, and then the special use permit. So I'm a little bit confused by your last answer. You're saying that if we wanted to direct additional conversation with the neighborhood about the southwest quadrant, I can see why this has been confusing. It's hard to keep it in your head with the directions with not being there. But if we want to require that additional conversation, you're saying that we would need to defer the special use permit discussion and vote?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. No, you would not need to defer it. You could direct the applicant to, that your action could be an approval with the condition that the water tank be located, say, in the southwest quadrant of the park. And that would be your recommendation that would then go forward to the City Commission.
Commissioner Carpenter, do you have any follow-up questions?
Yes, Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. That still leaves us with, if we just think that we want to have this additional conversation, are you suggesting that if for some reason we get to the special use permit tonight, if we want to add conditions to it, one of those conditions is, do we have to specify another location, or do we have to say we have to have these communications and present options to the City Commission?
Jeff or Randy could, Sandy Day Planning, Jeff or Randy could weigh in on this more, but I believe that you would not necessarily have to direct to a particular quadrant. Structure your recommendation in such a way that indicates that an alternative location would be preferable, and forward your recommendation to the City Commission, whose ultimate decision will be this plan or some version of it.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner, I appreciate that, because a lot of what's being discussed tonight is budgetary in nature, and that's really outside of our purview. You know, the ultimate decisions, if they are made based on budget, that's for the governing body. It's relevant to our considerations as to our ultimate recommendation. And I think we're getting to the point that at least several of us have espoused reservations about trying to rebuild in the same site, given what that would entail. So we're looking at a new structure someplace up there. Unless somebody can tell me from the city that there's an alternative location even outside of the park that would function just as well. So I'm just trying to narrow this down to what we should actually be trying to put into our motion and consideration for tonight. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. It doesn't sound like we're quite, I mean, we're honing in on something that could resemble a motion. I just want to, first of all, I just want to thank the public for their detailed comments and just taking the effort to come out this evening. I agree with Commissioner Willie that more of a public conversation needs to take place in light of the unanimous public opposition to this. Not a single voiced, for example, from Hilltop or what is it, Oxford, which would actually receive increased access to this park by moving the water tower. Not from anyone who would see their property, who would suspect that their property values would go up by having the water tower move further away from their property. It seems to me that more of a conversation needs to take place, more of an open conversation that gives the public a chance to express their voice, so that even if the final decision were to put the water tower precisely where it's proposed, at least the public would feel that they had a role in that decision. So, I would like to piggyback on Commissioner Carpenter's questions and ask Jeff, for a recommendation.
In what way, what modification to the existing items here would be most likely to produce that outcome with minimal disruption to the process?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Commissioner Carter, that's a great question. Off the top of my head, I would say, you could, kind of thinking of the line of the Planning Commission here, is you're looking ultimately at the use of the site, but because it is a special use permit, you're also looking at how it's going to be existing in some way on the site. So that's why you usually see the site plans that come up with these items here. I am going to probably look for Amy to kind of chime in on this one as we start going along here a little bit. I mean, ultimately, you could approve approve the special use permit with conditions that it be site-dependent. Location may be studied to find a different site. You may also choose to defer the application to allow for continued work by MSO and their engineering team to kind of consider those alternative options on there. I would suspect that those alternatives would also entail probably discussions with the community, but I couldn't say if that would always be the case, because that is not a mandate from code necessarily that we could, you could impart on that, but you can make that recommendation as part of your item there. In that line, knowing that the placement of the structure would affect some of the easements that you would be seeing also as part of your platting document this evening, I would probably recommend that both of them be taken in the same direction, not have them split apart at the evening, because there's a potential that you could end up with a structure that moves, but an easement that it needs to be reevaluated as part of that analysis for the overall site. So that would be, just off the top of my head at the moment, a couple of items to put in there, and see if Amy's got anything to add, or nope, say a no on that one. So that would be my take on that item for this evening, Commissioner.
David Carter, Chair. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to direct a question to, I'm going to ask the other commissioners whether, based on Jeff's feedback,
Anyone would be prepared to make a motion at this point, or are further questions or discussion required? Commissioner Struckoff.
First of all, I'm pleased that we are moving in this direction. I think that my feeling was that a new, both for financial and for the service, financial reasons and for reasons having to do with water service in our community, the new tower was the way to go. I was grateful for the discussion about erecting it in the current location of the existing tower, but I'm glad that that we've come to the point that we understand that there are values that we may not have taken into consideration, and that the trees and facilities on the southwest corner might be movable or replaceable. So I'm grateful that we were able to come to this point in the discussion. My inclination right now is to either defer together or to or if anybody feels it should be separated and the site plan should be passed right now, I'm okay with that too. But I think following up on Jeff's, I'm sorry, the preliminary plat, following up on Jeff's comments, which I think I understood to be, if we wish to defer, we should defer them together. I'm also amenable to that. But I just want to repeat that I'm grateful we've had this extra discussion and that the possibility of moving it to this location has come to light simply because there were some values there that we had not considered regarding that southwest corner and the feasibility of it. I would like to see a thorough feasibility study on that exact location, whether that location is part of a motion or whether just the phrase an alternative location to the proposal is in the motion. Either one is fine by me, but I'm glad that we are having a hard look at this location because I believe a new tower is needed in this park, and I'm glad that we might be able to find something that's a little more acceptable in terms of location.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckhoff. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I'm comfortable, probably most comfortable with deferring both items 1 and 2 to facilitate to have that neighborhood discussion. But I think we as a Planning Commission should be really clear about what discussion we're looking for and what's not on the table in terms of if people are generally in agreement about that there needs to be a new water tower and that it can't be in the exact same location, just so that if we're asking the city staff to have those conversations with neighbors, that we not open it up to all those discussions if indeed we're only willing to consider alternative locations. So can we hear from other planning commissioners to see if that's how other people are feeling about it, or if they think that all those topics need to be on the table for city discussion?
And if I could, Commissioner Willie, just to clarify, you're saying we need all other options, including maintaining the existing water tower or keeping it or building a new water tower on the existing site. Is that correct?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's cost effective to have a new tower in a somewhat different location. But I want to make sure that other commissioners are feeling that way also before we would make a motion to defer, so that we can give some clarity to what those discussions could be and not just reinvent the wheel on everything.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. David Carter, Chair. Could I ask, are there any other commissioners who haven't had an opportunity to speak up to chime in about the direction this is taking?
Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner.
Please, Commissioner Sands.
So I agree with Karen. I'm not opposed to the, well, let me just say it this way. My reservations come from the fact that this is site plan using the assumption that the other cell phone service providers are not going to want their cell panels up, and they are not going to want a server box for them at the base. I think that is a I think that's an omission that should be corrected. And the reason why I agree with Commissioner Willie on I'm not opposed to it moving in location is because if you look at the aerial photos on the map of the city, there was a tower in the southwest corner, albeit a very small one, in the southwest corner of the site, reflected in the 1937 aerial, and eventually that had to be moved to the northwest area where the current tower was constructed in 1955, presumably because the city at the time needed to retain the service of that site and move it to the next one. So whether or not that site with the rock conditions are as suitable as they are in the north east, I don't have the technical expertise to offer on that. But I would add the other reason that I'm not loving this project is the having 2 access points seems like we could plan it a bit better, site plan it a bit better, and have shared access. And I think a shared access may ease some of the concerns that the neighborhood has on just kind of cutting up the entire site. Those are my thoughts. I'm for having a deferment, but because I don't think we have the information right now to move forward on a vote of approval. But I want to be clear that I think the community writ large needs this over just a repair. One of the things that was brought up, we talked about the time, and actually, you know what? I'm not going to bring that up because Commissioner Carpenter's right. It's about budget, and that shouldn't be our purview. Over.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Commissioner Sinclair, I think you could say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Excuse me. I guess I don't have a real problem with going in the direction we're talking about with deferment, but I would like to maybe push back a little bit because when I look at the review criteria, I don't see anything of particular concern with respect to the preliminary plat or the variance. And then for the criteria with the special use permit, based on the comments tonight and the ones that were submitted in writing, it looks to me like really only criteria 2, 3, and 4 are implicated, and those are, in short, whether this use is compatible with the adjacent uses, whether there's going to be a substantial diminution in value of adjacent properties, and then if there are going to be any significant adverse impacts on the natural environment. And quite honestly, I'm not convinced that any of those 3 are problematic. And so I look at this and what's presented to us, I'm struggling finding a reason why it should be punted, not punted, but deferred. And so I think what we're doing and what I'm sensing is we're reacting to a lot of vocal opposition. And from what I can tell, it's opposition from the folks on the east side who are going to have the tower move towards them. And so to the extent we haven't received a lot of comments from the people to this, off of Stratford or in the area where the Gaddies live, it could be just a silence because they don't really have a position on it and moving away from them. And so I'm okay sort of deferring it and trying to see if the applicant will work with the neighborhood if we're trying to build consensus. But, I'm just having trouble seeing if we are grounding this really well in the review criteria or just reacting to people who are upset with it getting moved closer to them.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. I'd just like to kind of, David Carter, Chair, I just want to repeat the point that I was trying to make, in which even, in my opinion, based on the feedback we've heard tonight, even if the project ended up going forward in precisely the same spot, I think following a community dialogue, there would be a greater chance of support where the public had actually had an opportunity to participate in that decision. So I think that's my stance in supporting a deferral. And I'm wondering if we are at a position where someone would be, but I haven't heard anybody make any alternative proposals. Would anybody be in, Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, Planning Commissioner, I just had a quick question for city staff, clarification of what is preferred, a deferral or an approval with a condition that the location be looked at, that the location possibly ordered. I heard both those things brought up initially. One was approval with a condition, not mandating the location of the water tower, and then I also heard deferral.
Sorry, Commissioner Ashworth, that's directed at staff and planning staff.
Sandy Day, planning staff. As far as staff's preference, I would ask that Leah Morris respond to that, but my suspicion is that their preference would be for you to move the project along. The city is the applicant in this. Planning staff, I don't know that we necessarily have a preference one way or another. That's a little bit outside of where we are at. We're providing you with the technical and the procedural processes from there. So I think either option does work.
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Yes, Sandy, you are correct. It would be the city's preference that we get approval with the condition that we do a feasibility study on the additional quadrants for a new tower, as well as additional public engagement on the selection of the sites with, considerations upon the feasibility study to make sure that we're still making financial sense, but seeking public engagement on that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Is anyone prepared to make a motion, or does someone want to ask any further questions? Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. I'm not making a motion yet, but thank you, Commissioner Ashworth and Commissioner Sinclair for kind of pushing this a little bit farther along where I was trying to go with my earlier questions about what process we're in here. I kind of agree we should keep this moving. I heard in the comments tonight about the other location that they weren't really discussed with the neighborhood, and we're always pushing for more discussion, but there were assumptions made on behalf of the neighborhood about the trees and the equipment, about preferences that have been stated. There were some assumptions. There may have been some miscommunication there. So I don't see what would hold us up on that preliminary plat, because and here's a question before I go further. After approval of the preliminary plat, where does the final plat go? Is that administratively approved, or would that come back to us? Or can we ask that it come back to us if it is administrative?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. The preliminary plat is an administrative approval that's completed. The only reason it would go to the City Commission is for the acceptance and dedication of easements.
Final plat.
Excuse me, final plat. My apologies. Thanks, Kyle. The final plat would go for the City Commission acceptance of dedication of easements, but effectively the final plat is an administrative approval. So the preliminary plat's viewing at the City Commission, or excuse me, at the Planning Commission is its public hearing portion of it.
And that plat, Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner, the plat currently specifies a location for the future construction. So Jeff, how would you recommend that if we want to move forward with a preliminary plat, that since it is going to be administratively approved, how do we address the issue that after further discussion about looking at that southwest quadrant as an option, how would we bring the preliminary plat and the final plat into, well, to match up, for lack of a better word right now?
Sandy Day Planning, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting Jeff's maybe response. The preliminary plat does not show the future tower. It only shows the existing improvements of the property as required of the preliminary plat. Preliminary plat in this case, because it is the city, we don't have to worry about dedications of easement. The only dedication being proposed really is the street right-of-way, which is consistent with subdivision platting. So the action of deferring will not change the preliminary plat in this particular instance.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. Thank you, Sandy. That's just where I was trying to get. So we could move forward with the preliminary plat and its associated variance, and all we're doing is we're bringing everything into compliance with current city code on that. Now, the special use permit is where we get into the ultimate location, or we can actually go forward with that and say, yes, we need a new water tower, but on the condition that there's additional conversation and the two options are presented to the city commission. Would that be a viable condition on the special use permit?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. That is an option that commission
Could put on that for the city commission's consideration as it goes forward, yes.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie.
Commissioner Willie, Planning Commissioner. I'm very comfortable moving forward with the preliminary plat and the variance, enough so that I would make a motion to that if we get to that point. As far as the special use permit, I don't think the city commission would thank us for making them have the neighborhood discussion about a new set of winners and losers depending on which location is chosen. I think they would rather that pass through us first. And that also gives the public, 2 rounds of conversation about that. Because you're right, we haven't heard from people who would object to a southwest corner or whatever other location is being determined. So even though I know it slows the process down, I think I would be more comfortable with a deferral of the SUP to make sure that they have those conversations and then have it come back here and we hear from the public again. So, but I will make a motion on the first if you are ready for that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Willie. Just point of order, I'd like to ask Jeff, David Carter, Chair, sorry. Just like to ask Jeff, given Commissioner Willie's proposal,
Are those 2 motions that could be made effectively, what's the word I'm looking for, one right after the other? And or do they need to be treated separately?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. To make sure I understand the question correctly, could the motion occur for the platting action then followed by the special use permit? Is that how I'm following that?
Yes.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director, that's correct. It could occur in that line of reasoning. Would be the acceptance, or excuse me, the approval of the preliminary plat, the consideration of the variance, and then the recommendation for the special use permit could all occur in sequence there.
Thank you. Thanks very much. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie, please continue if you'd like.
Okay, I move that we approve the preliminary plat for the Stratford Tank Addition.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. David Carter, Chair. Do I have a second? Commissioner Sinclair by hand motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Jeff, could I ask you to call the roll?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. Certainly. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there anyone who'd like to make a motion on item 2? Commissioner Willie.
Actually, we still have a motion on the variance to make, which I think is a separate item.
Thank you.
I move that we approve the variance request for the reduced right-of-way width for Stratford Road from 60 feet to 50 feet. And is this forward to the City Commission, or is this in with us, Jeff?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. This would end with the Planning Commission this evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Do I have a second? Commissioner Carpenter by hand motion. Any further discussion on item 1A? Then, Jeff, could I ask you to call the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. Commissioner Ashworth? Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Jeff. Now, may I ask for a motion on item 2? Or does anyone have any further discussion? Commissioner Willie, please.
guess that'd be me. I move to defer the special use permit SUP 20-113 for the Stratford Water Tower for the construction of a new approximately 140-foot tall water tank and the demolition of the existing water tank, including development space for relocation to telecommunication equipment and antennas mounted to the structure, located at 1225 Sunset Drive, submitted by the City of Lawrence, and with the intention that the City of Lawrence have discussion with the neighborhood about alternative locations and neighborhood preferences.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Do I have a second? Commissioner Ashworth by a hand motion. And any further discussion? Jeff, could I ask you to call the roll, please?
Certainly, Jeff Crick.
Oh, forgive me. Stop if I'm just a moment. Commissioner, looks like Commissioner Carpenter has something to say.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. Just a question to Jeff. Given the notice requirements to put this back on our agenda, is it going to? Can we pull this off for next month, or is it going to be at least 2 months?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. We would have the potential to put it on for next month, but it would be a very heavy agenda for consideration, but it is possible. Yes, Commissioner.
Okay, go ahead.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. Given that, any preference by the motion makers as to whether we should try for 1 or 2 months for this to come back?
I guess if I'm choosing, I would prefer for it to come back within a month so that we don't delay the project any further than we already have.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie and Commissioner Carpenter. David Cutter, Chair. Commissioner Carpenter, any follow-up to that?
No, thank you.
Okay, very good. Jeff, could I ask you to call the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
No.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1.
Thank you, Jeff. And again, thanks to everyone who spent their evening with us today and for expressing your very valuable viewpoints.
With that, I'd like to move on to item 3. Consider approving a request to rezone approximately 0.86 acres at 1209 Research Park Drive. And it looks like Avery is going to be presenting.
Excuse me, Chair Carter. Is there a possibility that we might take just a short little break?
That's a great question. Although I don't expect the last 2 items to take more than probably 10 minutes total, you never know. So I'd like to call a a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Kurt, you ready? Yes. All right. Mr. Chair, room is ready at your order.
Very good, thank you. So David Carter, Chair, we're going to return to item number 3, consider approving a request to rezone approximately 0.86 acres near 1209 Research Park
Drive, and we have Avery to present on the subject.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Avery Kerner, and I am a planning aide with the Planning and Development Services Department. The item before you this evening is a request to rezone approximately 0.86 acres from IBP Industrial Business Park District to RS7 Single Dwelling Residential District to OS Open Space District for property located near 1209 Research Park Drive. This item was initiated by you all at the May 27th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting, and the City of Lawrence is the property owner of record. The subject property is located to the west of 1209 Research Park Drive. The request is for 2 parcels. One has frontage along Stone Creek Drive, while the other has frontage along Legends Drive. Together, they create a greenway passage between Stone Creek Drive and Legends Drive. During the analysis of another nearby rezoning application, staff identified this item's subject property as being more appropriately zoned open space district. The subject property is owned by the City of Lawrence and is part of DeVictor Park, a majority of which is located just to the west of the subject property. In 2000, the subject property was platted and dedicated as a future pedestrian greenway connection to Legends Drive. At this time, a utility easement encumbering the entire property was also dedicated to the City of Lawrence. Today, the property remains undeveloped without a paved path, though Parks and Recreation is currently working on getting cost estimates to finish the path. This rezoning application tonight does not include plans for the development of said path. These plans will require a separate site plan application, which would be reviewed and approved administratively. The park's current use is passive recreation. Passive recreation is defined by code as areas used or designed for passive and individual sports and recreational activities, such as, but not limited to, greens and commons, gardens, arboretums, and conservatories, pedestrian, bicycle, and equestrian paths, trails, and walkways, and benches, plaza, or seating areas and picnic areas. While passive recreation is a permitted use in both RS7 and IBP zoning districts, the open space district is a more appropriate zoning district for this segment of land and will allow a uniform zoning district to be applied to DeVictor Park in its entirety. Staff reviewed the proposed rezoning against a number of criteria, including the golden factors. The request meets several goals of Plan 2040 and is in line with the character of the neighborhood and will not generate any detrimental effects to adjacent properties. For these reasons and the reasons noted in the staff report, staff recommends the Planning Commission forward to the City Commission a recommendation to approve the proposed rezoning from IBP and RS7 districts to open space district for the property located near 1209 Research Park Drive. And with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Avery. David Carter, Chair. It doesn't look like we have anyone signed up for public comment. Kyle, could I ask you to confirm if anyone is in the chamber for this item?
Kyle Kobe with Planning. I can confirm no one is in the chamber for this item.
Thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. With that, I'll turn it back to the Commission. Any questions, observations, motions? Commissioner Struckoff.
I am happy to make a motion following up on our May discussion of this area. I move that we approve the request for rezone 0.86 acres from IBP and RS7 to OS at 1209 Research Park Drive, based on the findings in the staff report, and forward that recommendation to the City Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckoff. David Carter, Chair. Do I have a second? Commissioner Ashworth by hand motion. Any Final discussion?
Seeing none. Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair, brings us to our final agenda item tonight. Item number 4, consider approving a text amendment to the City of Lawrence Code regarding platting requirements in the city. Looks like Catherine's going to present.
Evening, Commissioners. Catherine Week. So I probably have the least interesting item, but no less important. Sometimes we have to update our code language. You all initiated a text amendment to clarify some platting language on January 22nd of 2020. And this is the text amendment we're bringing before you to help clarify that language. Staff has come across instances where there is development activity planned for either unplatted or partially platted property. And that code language doesn't specifically or clearly speak to parcels that are partially platted or that contain land that's been transferred back to private property ownership via vacation. And so this text amendment tries to clarify instances where that occurs and help property owners with a kind of streamlined process in that instance where they may not have to do a full preliminary and final plat. So the code language is specific to 20-801C2, where it states that for property within the incorporated city limits of Lawrence, no building permit or sign permit for permanent freestanding sign as defined in Chapter 5, Article 18 of the City Code shall be issued unless the property is platted as a lot of record. And if you've surveyed through the staff report there, the text in red in the staff report shows the additions where staff is attempting to clarify the language. The current land development code doesn't address a definition for what a building permit entails. We've taken the definition from the building code and placed it in this text amendment to add to Article 8 and Article 17, where definitions are located in our development code. And we're also adding the exception to this for building permits that are required for general maintenance or replacements or repairs of equipment that might be necessary for providing basic life safety. It is intended that those permits would be exempted from this requirement. So any piece of property that has existing development on it that would need to replace those types of items or equipment would not have to go through a platting process to general upkeep of their property. And then with any text amendment, anytime you're touching one section of code, there are usually a couple other sections where it impacts. In this case, clarifying this language and creating exemptions for building permit, we required the definitions. And then also, we're trying to provide a process of the minor subdivision as opposed to preliminary and final plat in instances where the property is partially platted or, as I said, vacated right away, has been reverted back to private ownership. And so there's a couple sections in 2813 where a final plat is specifically referenced, and this text amendment would add the additional language of or minor subdivision where the code allows, so that there is the opportunity, if the development activity is permitted by minor subdivision, that the minor subdivision process could be utilized for partially platted property. So that is pretty much the gist of this text amendment, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions or clarify any language if necessary.
Thank you, Catherine. David Carter, Chair. Kyle, do we have any public comment in the, anyone for public comment there in the chamber?
Kyle Kobe with planning, none that I see.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to the commission. Any questions about
the text that Catherine has presented? Or any Commissioner Willie?
Erin Willie, Planning Commissioner. I appreciate anything that helps streamline things for an applicant, especially for just doing repairs or getting a simple building permit for, for electrical or something like that, to just make it easier for people to get through the hoops that we have for them. So, and I assume that that's kind of the intention of this update. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. I just wondered if staff had an estimate of how much unplatted land might still be in the city limits.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. It's not a large portion of it, but it's more than you would think. It typically occurs on the east side of town, mainly between Barker and as you go towards the city limits out that way. It's also, you tend to see a lot of it in North Lawrence and in some of the areas in that surrounding area. So it's more than you would think off the top of your head, but it's not a large portion of the community. It's usually centralized in some of the older plats that would have been in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s era.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. Any other questions, comments, motions? Commissioner Butler, was that a... Did you want to say something?
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I was calling on Commissioner Butler.
Sorry.
I will defer to Commissioner Sands. I was just going to say you're really stretching from me scratching my head to make an motion.
I just thought you might want to be moving things along.
Ooh,
all right, Commissioner Sands, please.
I'd like to make a motion to approve text amendment TA 20-00003 to the City of Lawrence Code, Chapter 20, regarding the plating requirements in the City of Lawrence, and forward that recommendation of approval to the City Commission and the Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. David Carter, Chair. Do I have a second? Commissioner Sinclair, by hand motion. Any further discussion? Commissioner Willie.
Sorry, just a point of clarification on the motion. This is the city code only. It doesn't apply to the county.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. That's correct, Commissioner. It does apply to the city portion of the joint subdivision regulations, but because those regulations are approved by both the city and the county, it does have to go to both governing bodies for approval.
Thank you. I understand.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Let's see. We already had a second. We had further discussion. So, Jeff, could I ask you to call the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. As stated at the beginning of the meeting, we are deferring item F until Wednesday's meeting. And so that just leaves us, well, I guess, point of order. For recess, do we need a motion?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. I would recommend a motion and a vote for the recess, yes.
That's what I thought. I saw Commissioner Carpenter nodding. So do I have a motion to recess until Wednesday? Commissioner Struckoff, do I have a second? Commissioner Ashworth. Jeff, could you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you all. We are recessed until Wednesday. Thanks to everyone. Have a good night.
There it went.